Let the day fade away. Settle into your bed or favorite chair, lower the lights, and let's take a slow journey into the past. You can also let us know in the comments where in the world you currently are and what time it is for you. You wake up to the sound of réveil, and it's not exactly the sweet melody you'd hope to hear on a Sunday morning. But then again, you're not here for a Hawaiian vacation. It's December 7, 1941, and you, my friend, are a soldier stationed at Pearl Harbor, the supposed jewel in the crown of America's Pacific defenses. As you rub the sleep from your eyes, the irony is as thick as the humidity. This paradise isn't quite as relaxing when you're on high alert for an enemy no one really expects to show up. The truth is, Pearl Harbor's strategic importance is undeniable. It's the largest natural harbor in Hawaii and home to the US Pacific Fleet. We're talking about a naval powerhouse with over 100 vessels, including 8 battleships, the pride of the US Navy. But let's not forget the 400 aircraft stationed here, ready to take to the skies at a moment's notice. Or at least, that's the theory. Here's the kicker. Despite all this firepower, complacency hangs in the air like the scent of last night's luau. You see, the US military's confidence is based on a cocktail of arrogance and underestimation. The prevailing belief is that if Japan were to attack, they'd strike the Philippines or maybe somewhere in Southeast Asia. Pearl Harbor? Nah, too risky for them. This underestimation is bolstered by a touch of racism and a dose of ignorance. After all, how could Japan, a nation that many in Washington see as technologically inferior, pull off a complex assault on American soil? It's all a bit like leaving your front door unlocked because you assume the burglar can't pick a lock. But hey, sometimes you don't know the burglar's been taking night classes. Back on the island, your pre-dawn routine is as regimented as ever. You're up before the sun, just like every other day, to the sounds of bugles and bustling soldiers. Breakfast is a hearty affair because, let's face it, who knows what the day will bring. As you shovel down your powdered eggs and mystery meat, you can't help but think of loved ones back home. Letters are sent, but replies take time, and the Pacific Ocean is a big salty barrier. Now, let's rewind a bit to see how we got here. Tensions between the United States and Japan have been simmering for years, primarily due to Japan's aggressive expansion across Asia. By 1940, the land of the rising sun had its eyes set on resource-rich territories, and the United States wasn't too thrilled about it. The solution? Economic sanctions, of course. America froze Japanese assets and imposed an oil embargo, choking off Japan's access to petroleum, a resource as vital to their war machine as oxygen to your lungs. Negotiations dragged on, but they were as effective as a paper umbrella in a Hawaiian storm. The Japanese, not ones to sit idly by, decided to push back in a way that would make the world sit up and take notice. Their plan was audacious, to say the least, a surprise attack on Pearl Harbor to incapacitate the US Pacific Fleet and buy Japan time to secure their conquests in Southeast Asia. A quick strike, a decisive blow, and then back to business as usual. At least, that's what they hoped. And so, here you are, in the calm before the storm. The sun is just beginning to peek over the horizon, casting a golden glow over the harbor. Ships float serenely in the water, and the morning air is punctuated by the sound of seagulls, not sirens. It's a day like any other, except it's not. Within hours, everything you know about this place will be turned upside down, and the echo of history will be louder than any alarm clock. It's a bit like being in a movie where you don't know the plot twist yet. Everyone around you is blissfully unaware, engaged in the mundane tasks of military life. Some soldiers are on their way to church, others are prepping for the day's activities. There's even a band playing on the deck of the USS Arizona because, hey, it's Sunday, and who doesn't love a bit of live music? But beneath this veneer of normalcy, a storm is brewing. Back on the mainland, the US, government is still trying to decipher Japan's intentions. Intelligence reports are as mixed as a bag of Skittles. Some say an attack is imminent, others think it's all just bluster. The thing about hindsight is that it's 2020, and right now, everyone is wearing blinders. The Japanese fleet has been at sea for days, quietly making its way toward Oahu, led by Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, the architect of this audacious plan. They're ready to strike with precision and ferocity. But before we jump into the chaos to come, let's pause to appreciate the absurdity of it all. Here you are, part of one of the most formidable naval forces in the world, and yet the very hubris that makes you feel invincible is also your Achilles heel. It's a classic case of overconfidence meets complacency with a side of underestimation for good measure. While the world spins on its axis, you return to your duties. Maybe you polish your boots, check your gear, or chat with a buddy about that girl back home. Little do you know that these simple acts will soon be etched in memory as part of the before. Before the bombs fall, before the smoke rises, before the world changes forever. And just like that, the calm morning is shattered by a distant, ominous hum. It's not the sound of a Sunday sermon or a brass band warming up for a leisurely afternoon concert. No, this is the unmistakable roar of aircraft engines, growling like a pack of angry hornets. You look up, squinting against the rising sun, and there they are, a swarm of Japanese planes descending from the heavens, their silhouettes stark against the morning sky. Welcome to the opening act of chaos, where disbelief is your first companion. The attack kicks off at 7:48 a.m., and you're about to become an unwilling actor in one of history's most infamous scenes. Over 350 aircraft from the Imperial Japanese Navy are swooping down, led by the notorious Mitsubishi A6M0s, those nimble fighters that have become the stuff of nightmares. These aren't just any planes. They're part of a meticulously planned assault orchestrated by Vice Admiral Chuichi Nagumo, whose name will soon be etched alongside this day of infamy. In the initial wave, 83 aircraft launch hell upon your once peaceful harbour. Dive bombers, torpedo planes and fighters, each with a specific mission, each executing with chilling precision. The torpedo bombers focus on the battleships, those floating Goliaths of American naval pride. The USS Arizona, USS West Virginia, and USS Oklahoma are among the primary targets. It's as if these ships have bullseyes painted on them, and the Japanese pilots have come to claim their prize. Let's talk numbers, because they don't lie. The attack is a masterclass in efficiency and brutality. Within minutes, the USS Arizona is hit by a bomb that detonates her forward magazine, causing an explosion so fierce it lifts the battleship out of the water. In a matter of seconds, over 1,087 crew members are lost, a staggering blow in both human life and naval power. Meanwhile, the USS Oklahoma rolls over like a beached whale after being struck by multiple torpedoes, trapping hundreds of sailors inside. In the midst of this chaos, myths start to take root. The narratives of unsung heroes, men who single-handedly turned the tide of battle, are compelling but often exaggerated. Take Lieutenant Commander Francis Thomas, for example. Legend has it that he downed 5 Japanese planes single-handedly, but the truth is far from cinematic. While Thomas showed remarkable courage, the reality is that victory was scarce and survival was the primary aim. The real heroism lay in the collective effort to save lives amidst utter pandemonium. And speaking of survival, let's address the uncomfortable reality. Training manuals didn't quite cover this. You're not just a soldier. You're a human in the thick of catastrophe, where instincts kick in and training takes a back seat. It's a harsh wake-up call that the romantic notion of war, the gallant tales spun by those safely away from the front lines, don't hold up when you're dodging bullets and trying to make sense of the chaos. The tactical brilliance of the Japanese assault lies in its timing and execution, catching the US forces completely off guard. The attack is meticulously planned down to the last detail, with Japanese submarines sealing the deal by targeting any escaping vessels. This isn't just a punch to the gut, it's a strategic masterpiece that leaves the US Navy reeling. The Japanese believe that crippling the Pacific Fleet will give them the breathing room they need to expand across the Pacific Rim without interference. But let's not sugarcoat it, there's a twisted irony here. The same hubris that led to the surprise of the attack is what ultimately fuels the American response. The US military was caught with its pants down, but this humiliation stirs a resolve that will eventually turn the tide of the war. The Japanese, despite their initial success, have underestimated the American capacity for resilience and rapid mobilization. It's like poking a bear and expecting it to just roll over. Back at Pearl Harbor, confusion is the order of the day. People are running to their stations, some in pajamas, others half-dressed, all in a state of disbelief. The air is thick with smoke, the stench of burning oil, and the metallic tang of gunpowder. Communication lines are overwhelmed, and misinformation spreads faster than the flames engulfing the harbour. This isn't the orderly strategic defence drill everyone's trained for, it's a free-for-all, a desperate fight to protect what's left. Amidst the chaos, the human spirit shines in unexpected ways. Acts of bravery emerge from the ashes, like the story of Dory Miller, an African-American mess attendant on the USS West Virginia. Despite racial segregation policies that relegated him to non-combat roles, Miller manned an anti-aircraft gun, a weapon he wasn't even trained to use, and shot down several Japanese planes. His actions earn him the Navy Cross, making him one of the first African Americans to receive such an honor. Yet, the heroism comes with a bitter note, highlighting the racial inequalities that pervade even in times of national crisis. As the first wave concludes, the damage is staggering. Battleships are burning, aircraft are destroyed on the ground, and the once mighty harbour is a scene of devastation. But the Japanese aren't finished yet. A second wave is on the horizon, promising more destruction. For now, you're left standing amidst the ruins, grappling with the new reality that war has come to your doorstep in the most brutal way imaginable. It's a day that will be remembered as one of America's darkest hours, but also as a catalyst for a nation's awakening. The attack on Pearl Harbor is a stark reminder of the cost of complacency and the high price of underestimating an opponent. As you stand there, smoke stinging your eyes, you're caught in a moment that will echo through history, a reminder that the past's lessons are often learned the hard way. The sun continues its climb in the sky as if oblivious to the turmoil below. But for you and for the world, December 7, 1941, will forever be etched in memory as the day the world changed, a day that tested the limits of human courage, resilience, and the harsh reality of warfare. The second wave comes like an unwelcome encore, just when you thought the chaos had hit its crescendo. At 8:54 a.m., the Japanese unleash another 167 aircraft, diving in for round two with the finesse of a heavyweight boxer aiming for a knockout. This time, their strategy is a mix of mopping up and maximizing destruction. If the first wave was a sucker punch, this is the brutal follow-up, targeting what remains of the airfields, the base infrastructure, and any ships lucky enough to have survived the initial onslaught. By now, the US response is a frantic scramble. It's as if someone flicked a switch, and the reality of war has finally penetrated the morning haze. Anti-aircraft guns that sat silent just an hour ago are now blazing with fury, spitting flak and lead into a sky teeming with enemy planes. It's the military equivalent of throwing everything but the kitchen sink at a problem, hoping something sticks, or in this case, hits. Here's where communication, or the lack thereof, really throws a wrench into the works. The attack has knocked out key transmission lines, leaving many units to fend for themselves without centralized command. It's like trying to choreograph a dance routine while everyone listens to a different soundtrack. Some soldiers are still operating under the assumption that these planes are part of a drill, a testament to the sheer disbelief and confusion hanging over the base. Meanwhile, radar technology, in its infancy, offers little more than an ominous blip on the screen, a warning that arrives too late to be of real use. This isn't just a battle fought with bullets and bombs. It's a clash between outdated tactics and the grim efficiency of modern warfare. On the Japanese side, the attack represents a high-stakes gamble. Admiral Yamamoto's strategic objectives are as clear as they are audacious. Disable the US Pacific Fleet, secure Japanese dominance in the Pacific, and force America to negotiate peace on terms favorable to Tokyo. It's a plan that hinges on the element of surprise and the assumption that the US, reeling from the shock, will sue for peace. Talk about wishful thinking. The economic implications of this devastation are as staggering as the immediate human cost. Let's talk dollars and cents. The loss of battleships like the USS Arizona and USS Oklahoma isn't just a blow to American naval power, it's a financial tsunami. The US. Navy's floating titans, each worth millions in 1941 dollars, think hundreds of millions today, are now smouldering ruins. The total damage inflicted is estimated at over $500 million in 1941 currency, a figure that would make even the most spendthrift government accountant break into a cold sweat. But here's the kicker. The Japanese plan, while brilliantly executed, overlooks one crucial detail. For all their tactical brilliance, They miss the oil reserves and repair facilities that sit tantalizingly within reach. These are the lifeblood of the Pacific Fleet, the arteries through which America's war machine will be reawakened and reinvigorated. It's like robbing a bank and leaving the vault untouched. Sure, the Japanese have dealt a heavy blow, but the US fleet isn't as crippled as it could have been. The battleships might be down, but the carriers, those nimble giants of modern naval warfare, are out at sea, untouched by the chaos. It's a small mercy that will have outsized implications for the war's future. Amid the destruction, stories of resilience and resourcefulness shine through. Take the efforts to patch up the USS Nevada, the only battleship to get underway during the attack. It's a testament to grit and improvisation, the ship limping toward open water like a wounded beast, only to be beached to avoid blocking the channel. It's a moment that encapsulates the can-do spirit that will soon become an American hallmark in this war. The human element of this disaster is impossible to ignore. More than 2,400 Americans are dead, and another 1,078 wounded. A tragic tally that turns the idyllic harbor into a somber graveyard. The attack galvanizes a nation, transforming Pearl Harbor into a rallying cry for American resolve. In the hours that follow, the word infamy will reverberate across the nation, uttered by a president whose voice trembles with the weight of history. And let's not forget the ripple effects on the home front. The attack shatters any illusions of American invulnerability, thrusting the nation into a war it had watched from the sidelines. Economically, the gears of industry will soon shift into overdrive, fueling a wartime boom that will forever alter the U.S. landscape. War bonds, ration books, and victory gardens will become the new norm as America mobilizes for a global conflict that demands every ounce of its industrial and human capital. But back at Pearl Harbor, as the dust begins to settle and the fires continue to rage, you're left with the raw, unvarnished reality of what's just unfolded. It's a moment that strips away the romantic veneer of war, exposing the harsh truths beneath. This isn't a tale of gallant heroes and noble battles. It's a brutal, chaotic clash that leaves scars both seen and unseen. As the sun climbs higher, turning the smoke-filled sky into a canvas of orange and grey, the enormity of the situation sinks in. Pearl Harbor is more than a mere military defeat. It's a seismic shift in global power dynamics. The world is watching, and what happens next will set the stage for a conflict that will engulf nations and reshape the 20th century. In this moment of reflection, you're reminded of the sobering fact that history isn't just made by generals and politicians. It's shaped by the countless individuals caught in its tide. People like you, thrust into extraordinary circumstances, forced to adapt, survive, and ultimately endure. As you stand amidst the wreckage, you're part of a story still unfolding, a narrative that will continue to challenge and defy expectations long after the smoke clears. As you stand amidst the wreckage, the gravity of what's just unfolded hits you like a sledgehammer. This isn't just a military defeat, it's a point of no return. Pearl Harbor has shattered the illusion that oceans can protect nations from the ravages of war. It's a wake-up call rung with the clarity of 1,000 alarms, a call that echoes all the way to Washington, D.C. Now, let's shift our focus to the political theatre happening back on the mainland. President Franklin D. Roosevelt, or FDR if you're on a first-name basis, is in the hot seat. On the morning of December 7th, he's just finished his breakfast when the news of the attack reaches him. Talk about a meal that doesn't sit well. Within hours, the White House becomes a hive of frenetic activity. Telephones ringing off the hook, messengers darting around like caffeinated squirrels. By December 8th, FDR is addressing Congress, delivering his now iconic Day of Infamy speech. It's a rhetorical masterstroke, a call to arms wrapped in the velvet of eloquence. Within a mere 24 hours of the attack, the United States declares war on Japan. The vote isn't just a formality, it's nearly unanimous with only one dissenting voice. Representative Jeannette Rankin, a woman who stood alone against the tide of war. Her stance is a testament to her pacifist principles, though it's a stance as popular as a skunk at a garden party. Now, let's talk about the rallying cry that emerges from the chaos. Remember Pearl Harbor. It's not just a phrase, it's a mantra, a battle cry that galvanizes the American public. The phrase becomes the backbone of wartime propaganda, plastered on posters, sung in songs, and etched into the national psyche. It's the kind of slogan that sticks like gum on a shoe. It captures the raw emotion of the moment, transforming anger and grief into resolve. But let's not gloss over the harsh realities with patriotic fervour. The attack on Pearl Harbor wasn't entirely unpredictable, despite the narrative of surprise that's often told. Intelligence reports had hinted at the possibility of an attack, but the signals were lost in a sea of bureaucratic noise. It's the age-old tale of too many cooks in the kitchen, each with their own recipe for disaster. In hindsight, the signs were there, but they were as easy to miss as a needle in a haystack. The myth of inevitability also deserves a closer look. The idea that Pearl Harbor was destined to happen is a comforting narrative, but it glosses over the complexity of geopolitical chess. Yes, tensions were high, and yes, Japan was on an expansionist spree, but wars are rarely inevitable. They're the result of choices, miscalculations, and the rolling of historical dice. On the ground in Pearl Harbor, the immediate aftermath is a scene of grim determination. The survivors, those who've weathered the storm, are tasked with the Herculean effort of cleaning up and rebuilding. It's an all-hands-on-deck situation, with everyone from grizzled veterans to fresh-faced recruits pitching in. The air is thick with the sounds of hammers, saws, and the distant rumble of machinery, a symphony of resilience and recovery. Economically, the attack is a catalyst for change. The American war machine, once idling in neutral, roars to life. Factories that once churned out consumer goods switch to producing tanks, planes, and munitions. It's an industrial metamorphosis that turns the US into the arsenal of democracy. The economic gears grind into overdrive, and unemployment, once a spectre of the Great Depression, plummets as men and women alike flood into the workforce. Socially, the attack on Pearl Harbor is a great leveler. It shatters the illusion of isolationism and thrusts America into the global spotlight. The nation's sense of invulnerability is gone, replaced by a steely resolve. This is a country that's been sucker-punched, but is gearing up for a counterattack. The attack also accelerates social changes, with women and minorities stepping into roles traditionally reserved for white men. Rosie the Riveter becomes the poster woman for this new era of empowerment, wielding a wrench instead of a rolling pin. But it's not all roses and rivets. The attack unleashes a wave of xenophobia and suspicion, particularly against Japanese Americans. It's a dark chapter in American history, one marked by the internment of over 120,000 people of Japanese descent. These are men, women and children uprooted from their homes, forced into camps under the flimsy guise of national security. It's a stain on the fabric of American liberty, a reminder that fear can warp the noblest of ideals. Back in the Pacific, the US military is licking its wounds, but also plotting a comeback. There's a sense of urgency, a recognition that the clock is ticking. The Japanese have a head start, but they've also awakened a sleeping giant, and that giant is stretching its muscles. The US Navy, once crippled, begins an ambitious program of repair and expansion. New ships are laid down, old ones are patched up, and the carriers, the unsung heroes of the Pacific Fleet, are prepped for their starring role in the battles to come. As the dust settles, the myths and legends of Pearl Harbor begin to crystallize. Stories of heroism and sacrifice are told and retold, each iteration adding a layer of gloss. But beneath the veneer of legend lies the gritty reality of war, a reality that's messy, chaotic, and deeply human. It's a reminder that history is made not just by the generals and admirals, but by the countless individuals caught in its wake. In the days and weeks following the attack, the world watches with bated breath. The United States, once a spectator in the theatre of war, has taken centre stage. The stakes are high, the odds daunting, but there's a sense of determination that cuts through the uncertainty. This is a nation on the brink of transformation, poised to become a global superpower. And so, the story of Pearl Harbor unfolds, a tale of tragedy and triumph, of myths and realities. It's a story that's far from over, with twists and turns yet to come. As you stand amidst the ruins, you're part of a narrative that will shape the course of history, a narrative that's as compelling as it is complex, as unpredictable as it is profound. In the aftermath of Pearl Harbor, as you sift through the rubble of what was once a strategic naval fortress, The long-term consequences of this attack start to unfurl like a flag in the wind. The US isn't just entering World War II, it's cannonballing into the deep end, creating ripples that will touch every corner of the globe. It's as if someone hit the fast-forward button on American involvement, transforming a nation of reluctant spectators into wartime warriors almost overnight. Let's start with the immediate reaction, mobilization. The US military goes from 0 to 60 faster than a cheetah on roller skates. The Selective Training and Service Act of 1940, America's first peacetime draft, kicks into high gear, swelling the ranks of the armed forces from a modest 1.8 million in 1941 to a whopping 12 million by 1945. It's an industrial-scale ramp-up reminiscent of Henry Ford's assembly lines, only this time it's producing G.I. Joes instead of Model Ts. And speaking of industry, let's talk economics. World War II becomes the great American industrial renaissance. Factories that once churned out toasters and Buicks now spit out tanks and bombers. By the end of the war, the US is producing nearly half of the world's armaments. In 1942 alone, the US churns out 47 AD-36 aircraft, a number that would make any Air Force salivate. It's like the country's GDP just gulped an energy drink and decided to run a marathon. Unemployment, once the bane of the Great Depression, plummets to a negligible 1.2% by 1944. Suddenly, anyone with a pulse can find a job, whether it's riveting battleships or riveting the nation's morale. But while the economic engine roars, the human cost is a grim counterpoint. As American soldiers land in far-flung theaters from Normandy to Okinawa, they quickly discover that reality is far less romantic than the propaganda posters back home promised. The battlefield is a far cry from the sanitized heroics depicted in newsreels. Instead of gallant charges, there's mud, blood, and the acrid stench of gunpowder. The reality is that war is a brutal, grinding affair, where survival often hinges more on luck than valor. Let's debunk a few myths while we're at it. The idea that America single-handedly turned the tide of the war is a neat narrative, but ignores the messy truth of coalition warfare. Sure, the US provided crucial support, but it was a team effort, with the Soviet Union and the British Empire playing starring roles in this grim production. The Eastern Front alone consumed over 80% of the German military's resources. Talk about a logistical nightmare. Back on the home front, the impact of the war stretches far beyond the factory floor. Women, epitomized by the now iconic Rosie the Riveter, flood into the workforce. By 1945, they make up 36% of the labor force, a seismic shift for a society that once confined them to kitchens and classrooms. And while this newfound empowerment is celebrated, it's also a temporary reprieve. When the war ends, many women find themselves shunted back to traditional roles, as if someone hit the rewind button on progress. The war also accelerates social change for African Americans. Over 1 million serve in the armed forces, and the contradictions of fighting for freedom abroad while facing segregation at home become glaringly apparent. The Double V campaign victory against fascism abroad and racism at home gains momentum, setting the stage for the civil rights movement in the decades to come. It's a reminder that the fight for justice is often a marathon, not a sprint. Now let's tackle the international scene. With the defeat of the Axis powers, the US and the Soviet Union emerge as superpowers, their wartime alliance quickly fraying into Cold War tensions. The Iron Curtain descends across Europe, and the world splits into East and West faster than you can say arms race. The Marshall Plan pumps billions into rebuilding Europe, cementing US influence across the Atlantic and ensuring that Western Europe remains a bulwark against communism. It's not just about altruism, it's a strategic investment with a hefty price tag of $13 billion, about $105 billion in today's money. But what about the Japanese? Well, after the mushroom clouds of Hiroshima and Nagasaki usher in a new atomic age, Japan surrenders and the American occupation begins. Led by General Douglas MacArthur, this is no ordinary occupation. It's a top-to-bottom overhaul of Japanese society, transforming it into a pacifist democracy with a constitution written under US auspices. It's a bold experiment in nation-building, one that lays the groundwork for Japan to become an economic powerhouse in the post-war world. Pearl Harbor's legacy, however, isn't just about geopolitics and economics. It's a psychological watershed, a moment that shatters the national innocence and ushers in an era of vigilance and preparedness. The US becomes a nation perpetually on guard, its military presence a fixture across the globe. The attack serves as a cautionary tale, a reminder that complacency has a price, one paid in lives and lessons learned the hard way. And as for those myths, well, they persist, often more comforting than the gritty truths they obscure. The heroic tales that emerge from the ashes of Pearl Harbor are retold in books, films, and documentaries, each iteration adding another layer of gloss. They serve as a balm for the national psyche, a way of finding meaning in chaos. But beneath the myth lies the reality of war, a brutal, chaotic force that reshapes lives and nations alike. In the end, Pearl Harbor is more than just a battle. It's a pivotal moment in history, a catalyst for change that echoes across generations. It's a story of resilience, of a nation rising from the ashes to confront new challenges and forge a new world order. As you stand amidst the remnants of that fateful day, you're reminded that history isn't just a series of dates and events. It's a tapestry woven from the triumphs and tragedies of those who came before us, a narrative that continues to unfold, challenging us to learn from the past even as we chart our future. If Angkor Wat were a person, it'd be that insufferably talented overachiever who aces every subject, runs 10 miles before breakfast, and still has time to volunteer at the animal shelter. Built in the 12th century during the reign of King Suryavarman II, this temple complex is the crown jewel of the Khmer Empire's architectural portfolio. It's the kind of place that makes even the most seasoned historians scratch their heads in disbelief. How did they manage to pull off such a feat without the benefit of modern technology? Well, spoiler alert, a whole lot of elbow grease and some incredibly savvy engineering. First off, let's talk about the sheer size of this behemoth. Angkor Wat covers a staggering 162.6 hectares. For context, that's about the same size as 300 football fields. And we're not talking about the cute little soccer pitches you find in neighborhood parks. We're talking full-on, regulation-sized American football fields. It's no wonder Angkor Wat is often described as the largest religious monument in the world. The grandiosity doesn't stop at size, though. The temple boasts 5 towers, with the central tower reaching a height of 65 meters. That's tall enough to make even the most stoic stone face crack a smile. If it weren't carved out of sandstone, that is. Speaking of manpower, the construction of Angkor Wat was a bit like organizing a music festival, but instead of roadies and groupies, you had around 300,000 workers, including architects, sculptors, and laborers. Oh, and let's not forget the 6,000 elephants. Yes, elephants. Because when you're moving thousands of tons of sandstone, you might as well go big. The stones used in construction were quarried more than 50 kilometers away at Mount Kulin and transported via a series of canals, because why not throw a bit of hydraulic engineering into the mix? It's not like they were busy building the largest religious monument in history or anything. Now, here's where it gets wild. The timeline. Angkor Wat was built in just under 30 years. That's right, 3 decades. To put that into perspective, some of us can't even finish a home renovation in that time. The precision and speed of construction with such rudimentary tools would make even the most seasoned contractor weep at the sheer insanity of it all. But these weren't just any builders. They were the creme de la creme of Khmer engineering. So how did they pull off this architectural miracle? The answer lies in their innovative engineering techniques, particularly their mastery of water management. The Khmer engineers were the rock stars of hydrology, creating an intricate system of canals, moats, and reservoirs known as barrages. These weren't just decorative, they were crucial for both the construction process and the sustainability of the city. By controlling the water flow, they could transport massive sandstone blocks with relative ease and ensure that the city of Angkor had a steady water supply even during the dry season. But let's not get too starry-eyed. While we often romanticize the grandeur of Angkor Wat, it's essential to remember the human cost. The monument wasn't built by magic, it was the sweat and toil of thousands of laborers, many of whom likely worked under harsh conditions. This wasn't just an architectural feat. It was a testament to the immense power and resources of the Khmer Empire. It was a way for Suryavarman II to flex his muscles and show the world just who was boss. In the end, Angkor Wat stands as both a symbol of artistic achievement and a reminder of the empire's ambition. It's a perfect blend of form and function, a masterpiece of design that continues to captivate the imagination. Whether you're a history buff or just someone who appreciates a good story, Angkor Wat is a testament to what humans can achieve when they set their minds to it, even if it means enlisting the help of a few thousand workers and a herd of elephants. But it's easy to get swept up in the awe of monumental achievement and forget the nitty-gritty details, the kind that would have modern project managers begging for mercy. When it came to building Angkor Wat, the Khmer weren't just stacking stones willy-nilly, they were orchestrating a logistical ballet on a scale that makes today's supply chain issues look like child's play. First off, let's talk labour. You thought your morning commute was bad? Try schlepping to a construction site in 12th century Cambodia. Day in, day out, about 300,000 workers toiled under the blazing sun, an assembly line of human perseverance. Picture this. Thousands of labourers, artisans and architects, all united under the banner of divine inspiration and, let's be honest, a little bit of coercion. It wasn't all sunshine and lotus flowers. The conditions were grueling. And the pay, well, let's just say nobody was getting rich off this gig. The elephants, those towering four-legged bulldozers, were the real MVPs here. These gentle giants, around 6,000 of them, were enlisted to haul enormous sandstone blocks, each weighing up to 1,500 kilograms. Forget forklifts, these pachyderms were the original heavy lifters. And they didn't just move stones, they moved mountains, literally and figuratively. Imagine trying to coordinate an elephant caravan through miles of dense jungle. It's a logistical nightmare that would have even the most seasoned project manager pulling their hair out. Now, let's talk materials. Sandstone was the material of choice, quarried from the sacred Mount Cullen over 50 kilometers away. These stones were then sent on a watery journey via an intricate system of canals. It's as if the Khmer engineers were trying to tick every box on the hydrological challenge list. Need to move giant blocks over long distances? Check. Want to lay the groundwork for the largest temple complex in the world? Double check. And then there's the small matter of costs. Building Angkor Wat was like trying to fund a modern-day mega-project without the luxury of crowdfunding or financial backers. The costs were astronomical, not just in terms of resources, but also human capital. King Suryavarman II wasn't just building a temple. He was making a statement, a costly, elaborate declaration of divine right and earthly power. But how did they keep everything from crumbling into chaos? The Khmer had a secret weapon, organization. The workforce was divided into specialized guilds, each responsible for a specific aspect of the construction. Stone carvers, metal workers, and carpenters all played their part in this grand symphony of sweat and stone. It was a well-oiled machine, operating with the precision of a Swiss watch, if Swiss watches came with a side of tropical humidity and occasional monsoon downpours. And let's not sugarcoat the living conditions of those who made all this possible. The workers lived in makeshift camps, their lives a constant cycle of toil and rest, with little room for luxury or leisure. The romantic image of artisans hand-carving intricate designs while humming softly to themselves, more like sunburned labourers with calloused hands, trying to keep pace with the relentless demands of their overseers. Yet, amid the hardship, there's a certain resilience that shines through. These workers were part of something monumental, a project that would outlast kingdoms and kings. It's a testament to human ingenuity and endurance, even if it came at a steep price. The grandeur of Angkor Wat wasn't just built on stone, it was built on the backs of those who believed, or were made to believe in something greater than themselves. So, the next time you find yourself marvelling at the intricate carvings and soaring towers of Angkor Wat, spare a thought for the unsung heroes of this epic tale. They may not have their names etched in stone, but their legacy is as enduring as the temple itself. And remember, the next time your home renovation goes a bit sideways, at least you don't have to organize a herd of elephants to get the job done. So, while you're still mentally wrangling those elephants and cursing your incomplete home projects, let's pivot to the political and economic stage where all this grandeur was set. The Khmer Empire wasn't just about building world wonders like Angkor Wat for kicks. No, this was the ultimate Game of Thrones, where temples were the currency of power, and the bigger the temple, the bigger the bragging rights. Now, when we talk about the Khmer rulers and their temple-building mania, it's crucial to understand that these grand projects were more than just architectural flexes. They were political statements, screaming, "I'm the boss," in stone and mortar. King Suryavarman II, the mastermind behind Angkor Wat, was essentially laying down his legacy in sandstone. It was a monument to his divine right to rule, a way of securing his place among the gods and reminding his subjects who held the celestial VIP pass. But temples don't build themselves, and they certainly don't pay for themselves. The Khmer Empire needed a robust economic system to bankroll these colossal undertakings. Enter agriculture and trade, two pillars that supported not just the grandiose temples, but the empire itself. The Khmer were masters of the land, with their economy heavily reliant on rice cultivation. And we're not talking about a quaint little paddy here or there. We're talking about a rice production powerhouse, thanks to the ingenious water management systems, those berets and canals we chatted about earlier. These hydrological marvels didn't just help build temples, they turned the land into a rice-producing machine, ensuring food security and generating surplus to trade. Now, trade was where things got interesting. The Khmer Empire was strategically located smack dab in the middle of the great Southeast Asian trade routes. Imagine the Silk Road, but with a lot more humidity and fewer camels. They traded everything from ceramics to textiles, and even exotic goods like ivory and spices. This trade network was the lifeblood of the empire, bringing in wealth and, more importantly, prestige. After all, nothing says, "I'm a big deal," quite like having access to the finest goods from far-off lands. However, it wasn't all sunshine and rice paddies. The political landscape was as tumultuous as a monsoon season. Power was constantly shifting, with alliances as stable as a three-legged stool in a windstorm. The Khmer rulers had to be savvy politicians, forging and breaking alliances faster than you can say dynastic intrigue. Suryavarman II himself ascended to the throne through a series of cunning moves, including defeating rival claimants and consolidating power through strategic marriages and military might. In this game, being king was as much about outsmarting your enemies as it was about divine right. But let's not get too carried away with the romanticized image of wise rulers and their benevolent reigns. The reality was far grimmer. The labor needed for these grand projects came at a human cost. Peasants were often drafted into service, their everyday lives interrupted by the demands of the empire. Taxes were high, and the burden of supporting such extravagant projects weighed heavily on the populace. It was a delicate balancing act, maintaining enough public support to keep the wheels turning while ensuring the coffers stayed full. And then there's the myth of the Khmer rulers as benevolent god-kings, overseeing a harmonious realm. The truth is, ruling an empire of this size was a logistical nightmare. It required a bureaucracy that could rival any modern government. The administration was a sprawling entity, with officials overseeing everything from tax collection to temple maintenance. Corruption was rampant, and the further you got from the central power, the more autonomy local officials wielded, often to the detriment of the empire's stability. This brings us to the economic strategies that underpinned the Khmer Empire's success. While agriculture and trade were the backbone, the empire also relied heavily on tribute from vassal states. These tributary relationships were fraught with tension, as vassal states were often just waiting for the right moment to rebel. Maintaining these relationships required a deft hand, a mix of diplomacy and the occasional show of military might to remind everyone who was boss. In the end, the grandeur of Khmer architecture wasn't just a testament to engineering prowess, it was a mirror, reflecting the complex web of politics and economics that sustained the empire. The temples were not just places of worship. They were symbols of power, wealth, and divine right. They were statements of identity, crafted in stone and standing the test of time. As we continue to explore the Khmer Empire's legacy, remember that behind every stone was a story of ambition, sacrifice, and human ingenuity. These temples weren't just built for the gods. They were built for the ages, a reminder of what humanity can achieve when it dares to dream big, even if those dreams come with a hefty price tag. And as we peel back the layers of this ancient civilization, we'll uncover more of the stories that made the Khmer Empire a force to be reckoned with. So stay tuned, because this historical ride is far from over. As we peel back the layers of the Khmer Empire's architectural legacy, it's time to venture into the intriguing world of myths and legends that have swirled around these ancient wonders like a mystical fog. Because let's be honest, history without a dash of myth is like a sandwich without the filling, dry, unappetizing, and likely to leave you with crumbs of disappointment. First up, the granddaddy of all Angkorian tall tales, the divine inspiration myth. Picture this. Ancient architects receiving blueprints from the gods themselves, perhaps delivered by an ethereal courier service that works weekends and holidays. It's a story as old as time, and as appealing as it is unlikely. In reality, the designs of Angkor Wat and its sister temples were the result of meticulous planning, a truckload of practical know-how, and a keen understanding of geometry and astronomy. The Khmer architects were not merely scribes of divine dictation, they were visionaries who combined art and science in ways that would make Da Vinci nod in approval. Now, let's address the elephant in the room. No, not the ones hauling sandstone, but the idea of supernatural construction abilities. According to some legends, the temples of Angkor were erected overnight by celestial beings, or, in some versions, by demigods with a penchant for architectural speedruns. It's a fun thought, right? Who wouldn't want to skip the tedious parts of construction with a little supernatural assistance? But back in the real world, building Angkor Wat was less about magic and more about good old-fashioned manpower and ingenious engineering solutions. The actual timeline of about 30 years, while impressive, was a testament to human endurance rather than divine intervention. The appeal of these myths is understandable. Who doesn't love a good story where the impossible becomes possible, where stone towers are erected with a flick of a divine wrist? Yet, the reality is even more fascinating when you consider the sheer logistics involved. Coordinating a small army of workers, elephants, and resources over decades is a feat that makes present-day project management look like child's play. The Khmer were not only builders but strategists, orchestrating a symphony of stone, sweat, and savvy. Speaking of legends, let's not forget the romanticized image of the Khmer rulers as enlightened philosopher kings, sitting cross-legged on lotus leaves while dispensing wisdom like ancient sages. In truth, the political scene was a bit more like a medieval version of Game of Thrones, complete with power struggles, backstabbing, and the occasional battle royale. The rulers were astute politicians, using temple construction as a form of propaganda to legitimize their reign and awe their subjects. But let's take a step back and examine why these myths persist. Part of it is our human nature, our relentless desire to find meaning and magic in the mundane. Myths provide a narrative that fills the gaps in historical records, offering us a way to connect emotionally with the past. They're the seasoning on the otherwise dry meat of historical fact, turning it into a feast for the imagination. Yet, as captivating as these stories are, the truth offers a richer tapestry. Consider the water management systems again. Not exactly the stuff of legend, but a crucial part of the Khmer Empire's success. These systems were as vital to the construction of Angkor Wat as the stones themselves, ensuring that resources flowed smoothly and that the city thrived. It's not as glamorous as celestial architects, but in terms of sheer impact, the Khmer mastery of hydrology was nothing short of miraculous. And then there's the myth of Angkor Wat, as a solitary marvel, standing alone in the jungle like an ancient monolith. In reality, it was part of a sprawling urban centre, a bustling metropolis of temples, homes, and markets. Recent archaeological findings using LiDAR technology have revealed the full extent of this urban landscape, showing that Angkor was one of the largest pre-industrial cities in the world. It's a reminder that while the temples are the stars of the show, they were part of a much larger, interconnected society. So, the next time you find yourself wandering through the corridors of Angkor Wat, remember that every stone has a story, one of human ingenuity, ambition, and resilience. While the myths add a layer of mystique, the reality beneath is a testament to what can be achieved through determination and innovation. These ancient builders didn't need divine blueprints or supernatural speed. They had something far more potent, the power of human perseverance and creativity. In the end, the legends of Angkor Wat serve as a mirror, reflecting both our fascination with the extraordinary and our appreciation for the tangible achievements of the past. As we continue to unravel the threads of the Khmer story, we'll discover that the truth, while perhaps less fantastical, is no less compelling. So, buckle up, because our journey through the annals of Khmer history is far from over, and there are still many mysteries to explore and myths to debunk. While the myths of Angkor Wat paint a picture of divine guidance and celestial construction, the actual story is a masterclass in human ingenuity, a tale that still echoes in the corridors of modern engineering and architecture. So let's pivot from the realm of legends to the legacy these ancient wonders have etched into the blueprint of human achievement. First up, let's talk influence. The Khmer Empire didn't just leave behind temples. They imparted a wealth of architectural wisdom that continues to inspire and challenge modern builders. Picture this: intricate bas-reliefs that double as history lessons etched in stone. A pre-Gutenberg, no-paper-needed history book. These carvings tell stories of battles, religious epics, and daily life, making the walls of Angkor Wat a kind of ancient Instagram feed, minus the selfies but plus a few divine interventions. And let's not overlook the Khmer's hydrological genius. Their water management systems were nothing short of revolutionary, tackling both urban planning and sustainability long before these terms became buzzwords. Those expansive berets and canals? They weren't just for show. They were critical for agriculture, urban living, and yes, even temple construction. In today's world, where water scarcity and climate change are ever-looming threats, the Khmer's water management serves as an enlightening case study. Imagine if modern cities took a leaf out of their playbook. Perhaps we'd spend less time worrying about droughts and more time marveling at our own architectural feats. Now, if we could borrow a time machine and invite a Khmer architect to a 21st century city, they'd likely be both impressed and horrified. Impressed by our skyscrapers that scrape the sky like a toddler reaching for the cookie jar, horrified by urban sprawl that makes ancient Angkor's orderly layout look like a Swiss clock's innards. The Khmer's focused use of space and resources stands in stark contrast to some of today's urban centres that often expand haphazardly like a game of Monopoly gone awry. Yet beyond the buildings and the blueprints, there's a deeper legacy, the lessons in ambition and hubris. The Khmer Empire's rise and fall is a cautionary tale of how monumental ambition can both elevate and doom. On one hand, they achieved what many thought impossible, carving an empire out of the jungle with little more than human grit and elephant power. On the other, their relentless pursuit of grandeur strained resources and people, contributing to the empire's eventual decline. It's a lesson that rings true today as nations juggle growth with sustainability, often teetering on the brink of overextension. But let's not get too preachy. The truth is, we love a good temple story for the same reason we binge-watch epic dramas or devour fantasy novels. They're a testament to human creativity and the enduring quest to leave a mark literally etched in stone. These stories remind us that while the settings and characters change, the themes of ambition, struggle, and achievement are timeless. And let's face it, there's a certain thrill in imagining the world where humans and elephants teamed up to create some of the most stunning structures known to man. In the end, the Khmer architects handed down more than just bricks and mortar. They left a legacy of innovation, resilience, and the eternal dance between humanity and nature. As we stand in awe of their accomplishments, we're reminded that history is not just a collection of dates and dead kings. It's a living narrative that continues to shape our present and inspire our future. So next time you're stuck in traffic, gazing up at a gleaming skyscraper, or planning your next home renovation, spare a thought for those ancient builders. Remember that behind every modern marvel is a lineage of dreamers and doers, from the Khmer artisans who carved their dreams into stone to the engineers sketching blueprints on their tablets. And who knows, maybe one day, centuries from now, our descendants will look back at our creations with the same mix of wonder and curiosity we feel for Angkor Wat myths, truths and all. As our journey through the realms of Khmer architecture comes to a close, consider how these ancient feats of engineering continue to ripple through time, challenging us to build not just bigger, but better. From the grandeur of Angkor Wat to the bustling cities of today, the echoes of history remind us that while we may not have divine blueprints or celestial architects, we possess the enduring spirit of human creativity and perseverance, and that's a story worth telling. One temple, one skyscraper, one innovative leap at a time. In the early 19th century, Prussia was a place where aristocrats were practically born with monocles in one hand and a map of Europe in the other. Amongst this elite class, Otto von Bismarck entered the world on April 1st, 1815, and yes, his birth date was indeed April Fool's Day. A fitting start for someone who would later play political pranks on the entire continent. Born into a Junker family, which sounds like a club for aristocratic hoarders but actually refers to the landed nobility of Prussia, young Otto was raised amidst the backdrop of privilege and expectation, though not exactly in the traditional sense. The Bismarcks were an old family, their roots stretching back to the 14th century, and they held a considerable estate in Schönhausen, about 50 miles west of Berlin. Otto's father, Karl Wilhelm Ferdinand von Bismarck, was the quintessential country squire, a man more interested in hunting than political manoeuvring. His mother, Wilhelmine Mencken, however, was a different beast altogether, ambitious, intellectually sharp, and with a penchant for a little social climbing. She was determined that her son would not just be another brute-stomping landowner. No, Otto was destined for greater things. Education for young Otto was a series of misadventures. He was sent to the Plamann Institute in Berlin, a school known for its strict discipline. But Otto was less interested in Latin and Greek than in, say, how many frogs he could fit into his classmates' beds. His academic career was dotted with enough expulsions and near expulsions to make any modern-day prankster proud. You see, Otto had a gift. He wasn't just smart, he was cunning. He could talk his way out of a sticky situation faster than you could say detention. Fast forward to his university days, and you see a glimpse of the man who would one day unite Germany. Bismarck attended the University of Göttingen, where he spent less time in the library and more time in the dueling halls. Now, these weren't your average after-school fights. These were organized and, quite bizarrely, socially acceptable. Bismarck acquired numerous dueling scars which he wore with pride, like some people wear designer watches. In fact, a good dueling scar was as essential to a Prussian aristocrat's wardrobe as a well-tailored frock coat. It was said to prove one's bravery, though in reality it was more about showing you were reckless enough to let people slash at your face. While at Göttingen, Bismarck's antics were legendary. He was fined for keeping a dog in his dormitory, which was presumably a four-legged extension of his rebellious spirit. He was also known to have a taste for the dramatic, once filling a professor's room with live geese. His academic record was far from stellar, but his knack for making a memorable impression was unparalleled. After narrowly avoiding academic disaster, Otto completed his studies at the University of Berlin, earning a law degree in 1835. Then came the civil service, a realm where sharp tongues and sharper suits were the order of the day. Bismarck stepped into this world with a sense of entitlement that could probably be seen from space. Initially he worked as a judicial administrator in Aachen, and while the job was respectable, the young Otto quickly discovered that the monotony of civil service was not quite his cup of beer. His early civil service days were more about socializing and less about soul-searching. Bismarck was a hit at parties, known for his wit and his ability to outdrink most of his peers. Yet, beneath this facade of frivolity, there was a keen observer taking notes. He was learning that diplomacy was not merely about what was said in the drawing rooms, but also about what was left unsaid. It was about reading between the lines, understanding motives, and, most importantly, knowing when to strike and when to hold back. Despite his apparent disdain for the mundane tasks of administration, Bismarck's time as a civil servant was invaluable. He began to understand the mechanisms of power, how to wield it, and just as crucially, how to bend it to his will. His superiors may not have appreciated his irreverent attitude, but they couldn't ignore his potential. This was a man who could see the chessboard when others were still learning to play checkers. In these formative years, Bismarck was setting the stage for a career that would redefine Europe. The political landscape of the time was a tangled mess, with the German Confederation, an association of 39 German states, existing in a tenuous balance. Prussia and Austria were the big players, each vying for dominance, and Bismarck was about to leap into this fray with all the subtlety of a cannonball. As he embarked on his diplomatic career, Bismarck carried with him the lessons learned from his unconventional upbringing and his riotous youth. He understood that in politics, as in his beloved duels, sometimes you had to take a risk, sometimes you had to bluff, and sometimes you had to parry until you found the right moment to strike. This was a man who would go on to master the art of realpolitik, treating the political arena like a chessboard where the stakes were as high as the egos involved. So there we have it, the origin story of Otto von Bismarck, a man who wasn't just born to lead, but who carved his way through life with a mixture of charm, intellect, and a dash of audacity. As we delve further into his life, we'll see how he transformed from this impetuous youth into the Iron Chancellor, the architect of a unified Germany and a figure who would shape the fate of nations. But for now, let's leave young Otto as he stands on the precipice of his political journey, scars and all, ready to take on the world with a grin that said he knew exactly what he was doing, even when nobody else did. And so, Otto von Bismarck stood, poised at the threshold of a political journey that would leave Europe breathless. It wasn't long before his flair for diplomacy caught the eye of the powers that be, and in 1851 Bismarck was appointed as Prussia's envoy to the German Confederation in Frankfurt. Now, if you think being a diplomat in the 19th century was all about sipping tea and exchanging pleasantries, think again. It was a battlefield of wits and strategy, where words were wielded like swords, and Bismarck was about to show everyone just how sharp his could be. The German Confederation was a jigsaw puzzle of 39 states, each with its own ruler, agenda, and idea of order. Picture a family reunion where nobody agrees on anything, and the stakes are the balance of power in Europe. Austria, the unofficial leader of this merry band, had been the dominant force, but Prussia was itching to change that. Enter Bismarck, with his cunning mind and a diplomatic toolkit that included sarcasm as a primary instrument. Bismarck's strategy was simple yet brilliant. Play Austria and the smaller German states against each other, all while strengthening Prussia's hand. He understood that the key to power wasn't in shouting the loudest, but in making the right alliances, a lesson he'd probably picked up while manoeuvring his way out of those sticky situations in his youth. His approach was akin to playing chess on a board where the pieces were constantly changing sides and the rules were made up on the fly. In this game, Bismarck was the grandmaster. One of his first moves was to build relationships based on mutual benefit rather than coercion. Bismarck knew that economic interests often spoke louder than political aspirations. So, he championed the Zollverein, a customs union that economically tied the German states to Prussia, leaving Austria out in the cold. It's like inviting everyone to your birthday party except the one kid who always hogs the spotlight. By 1854, the Zollverein included most of the German states, ensuring that when it came to matters of trade and economy, Prussia was the one holding the purse strings. Bismarck's ability to read the room went beyond the economic sphere. He had a knack for understanding the undercurrents of political sentiment and played them like a maestro. When revolutions swept across Europe in 1848, demanding more liberal constitutions and unification, Bismarck saw them not as threats, but as opportunities. He deftly navigated these turbulent waters, ensuring that Prussia came out stronger and more centralized, while Austria floundered, trying to keep its patchwork empire from unraveling. Now, let's talk about the myth of Bismarck as a lone genius, the solitary architect of a unified Germany. It's a narrative as seductive as the idea of him having a master plan from day one. But the truth is, Bismarck was as much a product of his environment as he was a shaper of it. He was surrounded by a network of like-minded individuals, politicians, military leaders, and businessmen who shared his vision and helped bring it to life. This wasn't a one-man show. It was a well-rehearsed ensemble performance, with Bismarck as the charismatic conductor. Take, for example, his relationship with Albrecht von Roon, the Prussian Minister of War. Roon recognized Bismarck's potential and became one of his staunchest allies, providing the military muscle needed to back up Bismarck's diplomatic maneuvers. It was a classic case of brains and brawn working in tandem, with Bismarck ensuring that Prussia's military reforms were as much a part of the unification process as any speech or treaty. And then there was the economic powerhouse of Prussia itself. The Industrial Revolution was transforming the landscape, with railways crisscrossing the country like veins pumping new life into the economy. By 1870, Prussia boasted over 18,000 kilometers of railroads, more than any other German state, giving it a logistical edge that was as strategic as any diplomatic agreement. This industrial might was the backbone of Bismarck's plans, allowing him to project power in a way that was both visible and tangible. As Bismarck continued his ascent, he kept a watchful eye on France, the old rival to the west. The Franco-Prussian War of 1870 would become a defining moment in his career, but before that, it was all about positioning the pieces on the board. France, under Napoleon III, was wary of a rising Prussia, and Bismarck played on these fears with the finesse of a maestro conducting a symphony of discord. He knew that a united Germany would only be possible if France was neutralized, either through diplomacy or force. His diplomatic chess game with Austria and France was not without its risks. The Austro-Prussian War of 1866 was a calculated gamble, one that saw Prussia emerge victorious and Austria effectively ousted from German affairs. The battle was swift, lasting just 7 weeks, and ended with the Treaty of Prague. Austria wasn't humiliated, it was sidelined, allowing Bismarck to reorganize the German states under Prussian leadership, forming the North German Confederation in 1867. It was a masterstroke of diplomacy and military might, showing that sometimes the best way to win is to make your opponent think they haven't lost. Throughout these turbulent years, Bismarck's ability to adapt and adjust was nothing short of remarkable. He understood that the world was not static, that alliances could shift with the winds, and that the key to success was being ahead of those changes. It's a lesson that's as relevant today as it was in the 19th century, in politics as in life. The only constant is change, and the winners are those who can navigate it with grace and cunning. As we leave Bismarck at this juncture, he's on the cusp of his greatest achievement, the unification of Germany. But for now, let's appreciate the tapestry of alliances, strategies, and sheer audacity that brought him to this point. In the next part, we'll delve deeper into how Bismarck turned the dream of a united Germany into a reality, and how he managed to keep his creation intact amidst the shifting sands of European politics. Stay tuned, because the story of Otto von Bismarck is far from over, and the Iron Chancellor has plenty more tricks up his sleeve. And so, as the dust settled from the Austro-Prussian War, Bismarck was ready to play his most audacious card yet, the unification of Germany. Now, before we get swept up in the romanticized tales of Bismarck as the solitary mastermind orchestrating a seamless unification, let's remember that history is messier than a frat party on a Monday morning. The year was 1870, and the stage was set for what would become the Franco-Prussian War, a conflict that looked more like a bar brawl than a gentleman's duel. First, let's talk numbers. The war wasn't just about who had the bigger army, though that certainly helped. Prussia, with its efficient military machine, boasted an army of about 1.2 million men, thanks to conscription and a robust population. France, under Napoleon III, could muster around 600,000 troops. But here's the kicker. French military planning was as outdated as a rotary phone in the era of smartphones. While the Prussians were busy playing 3D chess, the French were still trying to remember the rules to checkers. Bismarck, ever the puppet master, knew that a united Germany needed a common enemy to rally against, and France fit the bill perfectly. He didn't just stumble into war, he practically gift-wrapped the casus belli with the infamous Ems dispatch, a diplomatic telegram edited by Bismarck to insult the French and inflame tensions. Imagine a tweet gone viral, but with much higher stakes. The French took the bait, declaring war on Prussia on July the 19th, 1870, thus uniting the German states under the banner of national defence. The war itself was a whirlwind, lasting less than a year, but it was packed with enough drama to fuel a season of any binge-worthy TV show. The Prussian military, with its railways and telegraphs, moved faster than a rumour in a small town. Key battles like Sedan and Metz showcased the Prussian advantage in organisation and communication. By the time Paris fell in January 1871, the French were reeling, and Napoleon III found himself dethroned and exiled. Talk about a bad day at the office. So, how much did all this cost? Well, the economic toll was staggering. Prussia spent about 420 million thalers. A hefty sum, but consider the return on investment, a unified Germany. For France, the price was even steeper. They had to cough up 5 billion francs as war reparations, a sum that could have bought you a small country, or at least a really nice yacht party. Now, let's debunk the myth of the smooth unification. The reality was more like assembling a jigsaw puzzle with pieces from 2 different sets. You see, while the Franco-Prussian War provided the political impetus, the actual unification was a backroom deal fest, with Bismarck charming, cajoling, and occasionally strong-arming the German princes into submission. Imagine a family reunion where everyone's arguing over who gets grandma's silverware, and Bismarck's the one calmly picking up the pieces while the rest are distracted. Bismarck's charm offensive was legendary. He knew when to flash a smile and when to flash a sword, metaphorically speaking. His diplomacy was a cocktail of intimidation and allure, with a dash of opportunism. Take the southern German states, for instance. Bavaria, Württemberg, Baden, and Hesse-Darmstadt were wary of Prussian dominance but were eventually convinced to join the new German Empire. How? By offering them favourable terms in the new imperial constitution and perhaps a few well-timed nudges that said, "Join us or miss out on the future." January 18, 1871, witnessed the proclamation of the German Empire in the Hall of Mirrors at Versailles, a locale chosen as much for its grandeur as for rubbing salt in French wounds. Wilhelm, I was crowned as Kaiser, and suddenly the map of Europe had a shiny new power player. But before we break out the champagne, let's remember the messy realities beneath the gilded facade. The new Germany was a patchwork quilt of different laws, currencies, and even postal systems. It was as if someone had declared a new country without reading the fine print. Bismarck's genius lay in his ability to hold this disparate entity together, a feat akin to juggling flaming torches while riding a unicycle. And then there was the economy. Bismarck's Germany was industrializing faster than you could say steam engine. By 1871, the country was a powerhouse of coal and iron production, with factories sprouting like mushrooms after a rainstorm. The economic boom was both a blessing and a curse. On one hand, it fueled growth and military expansion. On the other, it sowed the seeds of social unrest, as workers demanded better conditions and representation. Bismarck's response to these challenges was as pragmatic as ever. He wasn't above playing the long game, introducing social reforms like health insurance and pensions, not out of altruism, but as a calculated move to undercut the growing socialist movement. It's the political equivalent of giving a dog a bone so it doesn't bite you. So, there you have it, the unification of Germany, a tale of war, diplomacy, and no small amount of political theatre. Bismarck's legacy as the Iron Chancellor was cemented, but the empire he built was far from a monolith. It was a living entity, fraught with tensions and contradictions, and keeping it together would require all the cunning and adaptability that Bismarck could muster. As we pause here, it's clear that Bismarck's story is far from over. The newly unified Germany was a force to be reckoned with, but the challenges of maintaining this fragile unity were only beginning. The political landscape of Europe was shifting, and Bismarck's next moves would be crucial in shaping the future. Stay tuned, because the Iron Chancellor still has a few more tricks up his sleeve, and the drama of 19th century Europe is far from its final act. The political landscape of Europe was shifting, and Bismarck's next moves would be crucial in shaping the future. But unifying Germany was only the opening act. The real drama unfolded in the social and political aftermath, where our Iron Chancellor traded his military laurels for the cloak of domestic policymaker, or perhaps juggler, given the circus he was about to manage. Into the Kulturkampf, Bismarck's so-called culture struggle, a campaign against the Catholic Church that was less about theology and more about political control. Picture this. The newly minted German Empire was a patchwork of Protestant Prussia and Catholic southern states, a ticking time bomb of religious tension. Bismarck, never one to shy away from a good skirmish, decided to wrestle the church down to size. But instead of a knockout, it turned into a brawl with no clear winner and plenty of bruises. Here's how it played out. Between 1871 and 1878, Bismarck unleashed a series of laws aimed at curbing the church's influence in secular affairs. The May Laws of 1873 took a direct swipe, demanding state approval for clergy appointments and requiring priests to take an oath of allegiance to the state. It was a high-stakes round of poker, and Bismarck was bluffing with a hand that wasn't nearly as strong as he thought. The result? A backlash of biblical proportions. The Catholics, led by the formidable Centre Party, rallied like a medieval army defending their castle. Instead of quelling the church's influence, Bismarck's Kulturkampf fueled a sense of unity and defiance among German Catholics. Irony. Thy name is Bismarck. But don't mistake this for a moral crusade gone awry. Bismarck's motives were as clear as a frosty morning in Berlin. The church was a rival power structure, and Bismarck wasn't about to share the political limelight. As for the economic angle, the church wielded significant financial clout, owning land and resources that Bismarck would rather see in state hands. When the Kultur camp fizzled out, Bismarck, ever the pragmatist, quietly shelved it, proving that sometimes retreat is the better part of valour, even for an Iron Chancellor. Now, if you think Bismarck was done stirring the pot, think again. Enter the social legislation, or what some might call Bismarck's better side. Between 1883 and 1889, he rolled out a series of social insurance programs, health insurance in 1883, accident insurance in 1884, and old age pensions in 1889. On paper, it looks like a Cinderella story, with Bismarck as the fairy godmother of social welfare. But let's not get swept up in the fairy tale. This was no philanthropic epiphany, but a calculated maneuver to outflank the rising tide of socialism. With industrialization turning cities into sprawling mazes of factories and soot, the working class was growing restless. Socialists were gaining traction, threatening to upset Bismarck's carefully balanced apple cart. So, he did what any shrewd politician would, he threw them a bone. By introducing state-sponsored social programs, Bismarck aimed to pacify the workers, undercut socialist appeal, and keep the proletariat from revolutionizing their way into history books. The numbers speak volumes. By 1890, around 4.5 million workers were enrolled in the health insurance program, with another 1.4 million covered by accident insurance. It was a safety net, albeit one spun from political necessity rather than altruism. Bismarck's social reforms were a masterclass in realpolitik, using economic realities to stabilize the social climate while keeping power firmly in Prussian hands. Speaking of power, Bismarck's knack for alienating allies was as legendary as his political acumen. His relationship with Kaiser Wilhelm I was a delicate dance of mutual respect and occasional discord. But when Wilhelm I away in 1888, the year of the three emperors began, and Bismarck found himself in a precarious position. Kaiser Frederick III, a liberal at heart, ruled for a mere 99 days before succumbing to illness. His son, Wilhelm II, took the throne, and with him came a clash of titanic egos. Wilhelm II was young, ambitious, and not particularly fond of Bismarck's paternalistic approach. The new Kaiser wanted to be his own man, and Bismarck's domineering presence was about as welcome as a rain cloud at a picnic. Their relationship swiftly deteriorated, with Wilhelm eager to flex his imperial muscles and Bismarck unwilling to relinquish control. It was a classic case of an unstoppable force meeting an immovable object. In 1890, the inevitable happened. Bismarck was shown the door, his resignation a fait accompli. The Iron Chancellor's departure marked the end of an era, but let's not pretend it was all roses and farewell speeches. Bismarck left behind a Germany that was unified in name but fraught with internal divisions, a burgeoning industrial power with social tensions simmering beneath the surface. So, what's the takeaway from Bismarck's domestic escapades? For one, his policies were always a blend of pragmatism and opportunism, with an eye on maintaining power rather than ushering in a utopia. His legacy is a tapestry of contradictions, a champion of social reform who distrusted democracy, a unifier who sowed division, and a diplomat who made more enemies than friends. As we pause here, it's worth reflecting on the man behind the legend. Otto von Bismarck was not a saint, nor was he a villain. He was a man of his time, wielding power with a deftness that few could match. His policies were as much about survival as they were about shaping the future. And while the Iron Chancellor may have left the stage, the drama of 19th-century Europe was far from over. Germany stood at a crossroads, and the paths ahead were as uncertain as they were promising. Stay tuned, because the story of Bismarck and the empire he forged is far from finished. So, as Bismarck exited stage left, leaving the political theatre of Europe with a mix of applause and hisses, we find ourselves at the crux of an epic tale. The Iron Chancellor's political demise in 1890 wasn't just a curtain call for him. It was a seismic shift for the German Empire too. Imagine if Winston Churchill had been ousted at the height of World War II. Not quite the same scenario, but the ripple effects were similarly profound. Bismarck's dismissal came courtesy of Kaiser Wilhelm II, who fancied himself more of a leading man than a backstage player. In his youthful exuberance, Wilhelm II was all about that new world order, convinced he could pilot the great ship of state with less ballast. But let's rewind and dig into the political theatrics that led to Bismarck's downfall. It wasn't just a simple matter of a stubborn monarch and a wily statesman locking horns. No, this was the culmination of years of brewing tension, a clash of visions where Bismarck's realpolitik met Wilhelm's dreams of personal glory. Picture a political version of a high-stakes chess game where the pieces were people, and each move could mean the difference between checkmate and checkout. Bismarck, with his trademark blend of charisma and cunning, had managed to keep Germany's diverse elements in a precarious balance. His foreign policy, famously encapsulated in the delicate network of alliances, was like a finely tuned orchestra. The Reinsurance Treaty with Russia, signed in 1887, was a prime example, a diplomatic dance ensuring that Germany wouldn't face a two-front war. But as the score changed under Wilhelm's baton, the tune became discordant. Wilhelm II, preferring the grand gestures of military prowess over Bismarck's nuanced diplomacy, let the treaty lapse in 1890, setting the stage for future conflicts that would eventually embroil the entire continent. Now, let's talk about the myth of Bismarck as the ultimate puppet master, the man who supposedly had Europe dancing on strings from Berlin. It's a seductive narrative after all. Who doesn't love a story where one man pulls all the strings? But the reality is messier and far less flattering. Bismarck was indeed a master strategist, but even he couldn't control every variable. The European powers were like tectonic plates, shifting and colliding with a force that no single individual could fully command. While Bismarck excelled at timing his moves and manipulating the political chessboard, he also had to play the hand he was dealt. The alliances he forged were as much a product of circumstance as they were of design, and his ability to adapt was often more critical than any premeditated plan. And as we debunk that myth, let's not forget the economic context that shaped his tenure. Bismarck's Germany was an industrial powerhouse, with a GDP growth rate that would make any modern economist swoon. By 1880, Germany's steel production had surpassed Britain's, and its factories were churning out goods at an unprecedented pace. This industrial boom wasn't just about smokestacks and assembly lines, it was the engine driving Germany's geopolitical ambitions. But it was also a double-edged sword, fueling social unrest and the rise of political movements that Bismarck struggled to contain. The Chancellor's social reforms, those early forays into what we now consider the welfare state, were as much about quelling dissent as they were about improving lives. By providing health insurance, accident insurance, and pensions, Bismarck hoped to neutralize the threat of socialism. Yet, even as he sought to pacify the working class, Bismarck's policies often ignored the broader currents of social change. The iron and coal that powered Germany's factories also stoked the fires of labor unrest, and Bismarck's departure left Germany on the brink of monumental shifts. When the dust settled from Bismarck's political exit, his legacy stood as a testament to the complexities of leadership, a blend of pragmatism, opportunism, and undeniable charisma. But, as with any great historical figure, the passage of time has a way of gilding past actions, turning Bismarck into something of a political demigod in the popular imagination. The romanticized image of Bismarck as a lone genius is a narrative as enduring as it is misleading. He was a man who thrived on the chaos of his era, seizing opportunities with a deftness that bordered on the theatrical. Yet, in assessing his legacy, it's crucial to separate the man from the myth. Bismarck's Germany was a state born from conflict and compromise, a patchwork of disparate elements held together by the force of his will. The empire he helped forge was a testament to the power of diplomacy, but it was also a precarious construct, vulnerable to the very forces it sought to tame. And while Bismarck's life was a study in the art of political maneuvering, his story is also a cautionary tale about the limits of control. As we reflect on Bismarck's impact on European politics, the lessons from his life and career remain as relevant today as they were over a century ago. The enduring mix of cunning, chaos, and charisma that defined his tenure offers a window into the complexities of leadership, a reminder that the best-laid plans often go awry and that adaptability is as crucial as vision. So, as we close the book on Bismarck, let's take a moment to appreciate the man behind the legend. He was a statesman who understood the power of timing, a diplomat who mastered the art of brinkmanship, and a leader whose legacy continues to echo through history. The lessons of Bismarck's life are not about emulating his strategies wholesale, but about appreciating the delicate dance of power and the ever-changing landscape of politics. In the grand theatre of history, Bismarck's performance was nothing short of remarkable, a testament to the enduring power of charisma and cunning in shaping the world. Sailors on the Mediterranean, beware! You're entering the waters of ancient Carthage, the maritime juggernaut that made the term naval power synonymous with their very name. We're talking about a city-state so strategically positioned, it was like owning Boardwalk and Park Place in an ancient version of Monopoly. If Monopoly were played with ships and silver instead of hotels and coloured bills. Founded in 814 BC, Carthage quickly went from a Phoenician colony to the neighbourhood's most feared and respected kid on the maritime block, not just because of their boats, but because those boats were backed by some serious economic muscle. Carthage wasn't just any seaside town. Its location on the coast of modern-day Tunisia was like having a GPS coordinate that screamed, "Trade Hub." It sat snugly on the crossroads of the Mediterranean, perfectly placed to juggle trade routes between Europe, Africa, and the Middle East. This wasn't your average mum-and-pop fishing operation. The Carthaginians were diving deep into a commercial network that stretched over 3,000 miles from the Iberian Peninsula to the Levant. By the time the Romans started taking notice, Carthage had more connections than a social media influencer with a new viral dance. But how did they pull it off? The secret sauce to Carthage's success wasn't just their prime real estate. It was also their knack for innovation and a bit of showmanship. The Carthaginians were like the Steve Jobs of shipbuilding, revolutionizing the design and construction of their vessels. They had a knack for crafting ships that were fast, durable, and, most importantly, intimidating. The harbour of Carthage itself was a wonder. Imagine a circular military harbour, a kothon, designed to house over 200 warships with dry docks for maintenance and repair. This was naval engineering with a side of drama, the kind of place where you'd half expect the ships to emerge from the mist like a scene from a high-seas thriller. Let's not gloss over the reality here. Carthage's harbours were a blend of genius and good old-fashioned sweat. Constructed to be both functional and formidable, these harbours were split into commercial and military sections, effectively separating their trade and military operations. This separation was crucial, not just for organisation, but also for keeping their military manoeuvres under wraps. If you've ever wondered why the Romans felt a pang of envy every time they looked across the sea, this was it. Carthaginian ships were like the sports cars of the ancient world. They didn't just float, they flew across the water. The quinquereme, their signature warship, was a 5-rowed galley designed to outpace and outmaneuver anything the competition could muster. And, unlike today's luxury vehicles, these ships didn't come with an exorbitant price tag, but they did cost plenty of sweat and wood, lots and lots of wood. Some estimates suggest that a single quinquereme required up to 200 tons of wood and could hold around 300 rowers. It was an exercise in logistics as much as engineering, a floating powerhouse that made rivals think twice before engaging. Now, about those myths of invincibility, Carthage had a reputation that could make Poseidon himself check his calendar for fear of a naval clash. But here's the thing about myths. They tend to airbrush out the messy bits. Sure, Carthage was a force to be reckoned with, but they weren't invincible. They faced setbacks like anyone else. Remember the First Punic War? Rome didn't just roll over, they adapted, learned, and eventually built their own fleet, inspired by a wrecked Carthaginian ship they found washed ashore. Talk about recycling. And yet, the myths endure because they capture a certain truth. Carthage was a beast in its prime. A city-state with an appetite for trade and a flair for maritime dominance. But it was also a place where innovation met pragmatism, where the grandeur of its navy was matched by the gritty reality of maintaining such a vast empire. Their story is a reminder that even the most powerful forces have their fallibilities. So, as you drift off to sleep, let your mind wander to those ancient harbours, bustling with activity, filled with the clang of metal and the scent of the sea. Imagine the strategic genius of Carthage, not as an untouchable legend, but as a vivid, complex reality. A maritime powerhouse that, despite its eventual downfall, left a wake large enough to ripple through history. The sails of Carthage weren't just for show. They were the lifeblood of an empire that thrived on the whims of the Mediterranean currents. Imagine a quinquereme gliding across the water like an ancient Ferrari, its 5 rows of oars slicing the waves with synchronized precision. This was a ship designed not just to impress but to dominate, a floating fortress that symbolized Carthage's naval prowess. But let's not get carried away with romanticized imagery. The reality was far more impressive and complicated. The quinquereme was a marvel of naval engineering, indeed, but it was also a logistical nightmare. Picture this. Each ship required around 200 tons of wood, mostly from the dense forests of northern Africa. That's not just a lot of trees. It's an entire ecosystem felled to fuel Carthaginian ambition. And it's not just about the wood. The manpower alone was staggering. Each quinquereme needed approximately 300 rowers, not to mention the soldiers, sailors, and support staff who kept these maritime beasts shipshape. We're talking about a small village on water, each rower a cog in the grand machinery of war and trade. But how did Carthage afford such a formidable fleet? The answer lies in their economic savvy. Carthage was a bustling trade hub, a commercial powerhouse that transformed goods into gold. Their merchants were like the Wall Street brokers of the ancient world, trading everything from precious metals to exotic spices. It was this relentless pursuit of wealth that funded their naval ambitions. The Carthaginians had a knack for turning a profit, and they invested those profits back into their navy, ensuring they had the best ships money could buy or build. The economic costs of maintaining such a navy were astronomical. Estimates suggest that the upkeep of a single quinquereme could equal the annual income of an entire village, but for Carthage it was a price worth paying. Their ships weren't just tools of war, they were instruments of diplomacy, deterrents against potential invaders, and symbols of Carthaginian might. The political maneuvering required to maintain this naval empire was just as complex. Alliances had to be forged and maintained, trade routes secured, and potential threats neutralized. It was a game of chess played on the high seas, each move calculated for maximum impact. Yet, for all their might, the Carthaginians were not invulnerable. Their reliance on trade and commerce was both a strength and a weakness. In times of conflict, those same sea routes that brought wealth could also bring ruin. Blockades and naval battles could disrupt their supply lines, threatening the very lifeblood of their empire. And then there was the ever-looming presence of Rome, that rising power across the Mediterranean that viewed Carthage's dominance with envy and ambition. Despite the myths of Carthaginian invincibility, the reality was a constant balancing act. The Carthaginians had to be both warriors and diplomats, merchants and strategists. Their empire was built on the shifting sands of trade and commerce, a testament to their ingenuity and resilience. But it was also a reminder of the precarious nature of power, where one bad storm, literal or metaphorical, could upend even the mightiest of fleets. The legacy of Carthage's navy is a blend of awe and caution, a story of ambition tempered by the harsh realities of logistics and economics. For every quinquereme that cut through the waves with grace and power, there were countless hours of labor and planning behind it. And while the romance of their maritime empire continues to captivate, it's the gritty details that reveal the true genius and vulnerability of Carthage. As the story of Carthage unfolds, it's clear that their naval dominance was as much about strategy as it was about strength. It was about understanding the tides of trade and politics, navigating the complex waters of empire with a deft hand and a sharp mind. The Carthaginians were not just masters of the sea, they were masters of their destiny, carving a place in history with the same precision and prowess that their quinqueremes once carved through the Mediterranean waves. But remember, every legend has its cracks, and Carthage's tale is no exception. The waves of time can be unforgiving, even to the mightiest of empires. Now, let's dive into the riveting waters of Carthaginian naval tactics, where strategy met spectacle in high-stakes maritime chess. First on our list of legendary clashes is the epic Battle of Cape Ecnomus in 256 BC during the First Punic War. Picture this, a showdown between Rome and Carthage that was so grand it was like the Super Bowl of ancient naval warfare. And, spoiler alert, despite Carthage's impressive tactics, they didn't walk away with the trophy. The Carthaginian fleet, led by their admiral Hamilcar, not to be confused with Hannibal's dad, though the family tree is essentially a who's who of military legends, boasted around 30-50 ships. Meanwhile, the Romans, who were relatively new to the whole naval warfare game, showed up with a whopping 30 ships. The Romans were like the new kids on the block, but they had a few tricks up their toga sleeves. They brought along the corvus, a boarding device that turned sea battles into land battles, because when in doubt, just make it a land battle, right? The Carthaginians were masters of their maritime domain, and they had a strategy straight out of a playbook: lure the Roman ships into a trap by pretending to retreat and then attack them in smaller, more manageable groups. Think of it as an ancient version of divide and conquer, with a splash of naval artistry. But despite this cunning plan, the Romans, with their innovative corvus, managed to turn the tide. They latched onto Carthaginian ships like a clingy X, forcing hand-to-hand combat and ultimately securing the victory. The Romans lost around 24 ships, while Carthage saw 94 of theirs turned into driftwood. Ouch. So, why didn't the Carthaginians' tactics pay off? Well, it turns out even the best-laid plans can crumble under the weight of innovation. The corvus was a literal game-changer, and it showed that sometimes being a little unconventional can topple even the mightiest of sea powers. But let's not throw the baby out with the bathwater. Carthage's strategy was still a masterclass in naval warfare. It just met its match in Roman adaptation and ingenuity. Now, let's talk about the larger-than-life Carthaginian admirals and the myths that surround them. While these figures often get the Hollywood treatment, complete with grand speeches and dramatic flair, the reality was a bit more nuanced. Carthaginian admirals were pragmatic leaders who understood the importance of both strategy and supply chains. They knew that a fleet was only as good as its ability to keep sailors fed, ships maintained, and trade routes open. Take Hanno the Great, for instance. Often overshadowed by Hannibal, who gets all the press these days, Hanno was a Carthaginian statesman and general who understood the power of diplomacy as much as naval might. He wasn't just about fixing muscle, he was about securing alliances and ensuring that Carthage's interests were protected. And while he didn't have a blockbuster battle to his name like his more famous counterparts, his contributions were invaluable to Carthage's maritime strategy. But here's the rub: for all their prowess, Carthaginian admirals were not infallible. Their plans, no matter how well crafted, were subject to the whims of weather, the unpredictability of the seas, and the ever-present threat of Roman ingenuity. They were skilled, yes, but they were also human, operating in a world where one wrong move could send an entire fleet to the bottom of the Mediterranean. And let's not forget the economic context that underpinned all this maritime drama. Carthage was not just flexing its naval muscles for the sake of it. Each battle, each strategy, was tied to the lifeblood of their economy. The Mediterranean was their highway of wealth, and controlling it was as much about safeguarding their trade routes as it was about projecting power. The loss at Cape Ecnomus wasn't just a military defeat. It was a blow to their economic security, threatening their ability to maintain the vast network of trade that kept Carthage prosperous. So, what can we learn from the tale of Carthage's naval strategies? That even the most formidable forces are subject to the vicissitudes of innovation and economic necessity. The Carthaginians were not just warriors on the sea, they were shrewd tacticians, navigating the delicate balance between might and pragmatism. Their story is a reminder that the legends of naval warfare are not just about the battles won or lost. They are about the intricate dance of strategy, economics, and human ambition. And as we sail further into this epic tale, remember that the waves of history are as unpredictable as the seas themselves, ever shifting, ever challenging, and always fascinating. So, as we venture deeper into the turbulent waters of Carthaginian history, we find ourselves on the brink of a monumental shift, the Punic Wars, where the tides of fortune were about as predictable as a cat on catnip. The decline of Carthaginian naval power isn't just a tale of battles lost, it's an epic drama of economic strain, strategic blunders, and the relentless innovation of a certain Roman upstart. Let's set the scene. Carthage was riding high on its maritime throne, but the Romans were like that persistent itch you can't quite reach. They weren't just sitting back and watching the Carthaginians hoggle the Mediterranean glory. No, Rome was busy cooking up a recipe for naval success, adding a pinch of innovation and a dash of determination. Their secret ingredient? Adaptation. While Carthage was basking in its sea supremacy, Rome was learning, evolving, and waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Enter the Second Punic War, a period that was as kind to Carthaginian ships as a cat is to a mouse. This was the era when Rome decided to play copycat, but with a twist. They didn't just mimic Carthaginian ship designs, they improved upon them. The Corvus had already given them a taste of victory in the First Punic War, and now they were hungry for more. Think of it as the Romans getting a hold of Carthage's naval playbook and deciding to rewrite it with a few extra chapters on innovation. Now, let's talk numbers. By the time the Second Punic War was in full swing, Rome was churning out ships like they were going out of style. At the height of this conflict, they managed to assemble a fleet of around 220 ships. Not too shabby for a landlubber nation, right? Meanwhile, Carthage was struggling to keep up, with their fleet numbers dwindling due to economic strain and battlefield attrition. Maintaining a large fleet wasn't just a matter of resources, it was a Herculean task that required constant attention and, more importantly, a steady stream of cash. Carthage's economic woes were like a slow leak in a ship's hull, unseen but insidiously damaging. The strain of continuous warfare was beginning to show, not just in their naval capabilities, but in their coffers too. You see, keeping those quinquiremes afloat required more than just wood and sweat. It required a robust economy, and Carthage's was starting to fray at the edges. With Roman blockades choking their trade routes, the Carthaginians were finding it harder to fund their maritime ambitions. But let's not paint Carthage as the hapless victim here. There was also a fair share of strategic missteps, tinged with a touch of that infamous Carthaginian arrogance. One of the biggest myths surrounding Carthage is that they were too proud to adapt, too confident in their age-old strategies to see the writing on the wall. While there's a grain of truth to this, the reality is far more nuanced. Yes, Carthage had a proud naval tradition, but they weren't entirely blind to innovation. They just couldn't keep up with the lightning pace of Roman ingenuity. It was like trying to win a race with a well-oiled classic, while the Romans were busy building a speedster from scratch. Take, for instance, the Battle of the Aegates Islands in 241 BC, the climactic showdown of the First Punic War. Here, the Romans, under the command of Gaius Rutatius Catulus, decided to pull a fast one. Knowing Carthage's fleet was laden with heavy supplies, the Romans opted for lighter, faster ships. The result? A resounding Roman victory that left 50 Carthaginian ships sunk and 70 captured. Carthage's failure to adapt their naval strategy to the changing tides of warfare wasn't just a tactical error, it was a costly blow that reverberated through their economy and morale. But before we get too caught up in the numbers and naval maneuvers, let's take a step back and consider the bigger picture. The decline of Carthaginian naval power was as much about the shifting geopolitical landscape as it was about ship counts and battle tactics. Rome wasn't just a thorn in Carthage's side, it was a rapidly growing power that was reshaping the Mediterranean world order. The Romans weren't content with just challenging Carthage, they wanted to replace them as the dominant maritime force. And here's where the myth of Carthaginian arrogance comes into play. While it's tempting to attribute their downfall solely to hubris, the truth is more complicated. Carthage's leaders weren't just sitting back, sipping wine, and underestimating their Roman counterparts. They were grappling with complex challenges, economic pressures, political rivalries, and the relentless pace of Roman innovation. In many ways, they were like a seasoned chess player suddenly pitted against a prodigy who'd rewritten the rulebook. That's not to say there wasn't a dash of arrogance in the mix. Carthage's confidence in its naval prowess, while justified, sometimes bordered on complacency. They were the old guard, the seasoned veterans of the Mediterranean, and it's hard to pivot when you're used to leading the dance. But even the most experienced dancers can stumble, especially when the music changes. As we sail along the currents of this historical narrative, it's clear that the decline of Carthaginian naval dominance is a rich tapestry of ambition, innovation, and human folly. It's a story where the mighty fall, not with a crash, but with a series of small, almost imperceptible slips, each one compounding until the weight of the whole becomes too much to bear. So, what's the takeaway from all this maritime melodrama? Perhaps it's that in the grand chess game of history, even the most powerful players can find themselves in check if they're not willing to adapt to the changing board. Carthage's tale is a cautionary one. A reminder that mastery of the seas, much like mastery of life, requires not just strength and strategy, but also the humility to learn and the agility to change course when needed. And as we prepare to dive into the final act of this saga, remember that history, much like the sea, is full of surprises. So, stay tuned, because the waves of history are about to get even more turbulent. And here we are, at the tipping point where history pivots and legends are forever forged. Carthage's naval power, once the envy of the ancient world, was about to become a cornerstone of history rather than a current chapter. Now, let's dive into what that legacy really means, the good, the bad, and the downright fascinating. First off, let's talk impact. Carthage wasn't just a footnote in the grand narrative of Mediterranean dominance, it was a headline act. Its ships ruled the waves, its trade routes were the veins of commerce, and its innovations set the gold standard for naval architecture. The quinquereme, a masterpiece of engineering that influenced shipbuilding for centuries. It wasn't just a boat, it was a status symbol, a lesson in efficiency, and a reminder that speed and firepower weren't mutually exclusive. But the legacy of Carthaginian naval power is more than just a tale of great ships and strategic prowess. It's a story about the limits of dominance. Carthage's rise and fall serve as a cautionary tale about overextension and the dangers of resting on laurels while ignoring the storm clouds on the horizon. The Carthaginians were masters of the sea, yet their reliance on naval strength was a double-edged sword. Their fleets were both the backbone and the Achilles heel of their empire. A stark reminder that in the Game of Thrones, even the mightiest can fall from grace. The economic context of Carthage's naval empire was as complex as a Byzantine mosaic. Their wealth was tied to the sea, with trade routes that stretched like tentacles across the Mediterranean. But here's the kicker. Those same trade routes that made Carthage rich also made it vulnerable. The Romans knew this, and they exploited it with a ruthlessness that would make Machiavelli blush. By choking Carthage's supply lines, Rome didn't just win battles, they won the war of attrition, slowly suffocating Carthage's economy until it was gasping for breath. And then there's the myth of Carthaginian invincibility, a tale so enduring that it still captures imaginations today. The idea of an undefeatable Carthage, with its indomitable ships and fearless sailors, has an undeniable allure. But let's not kid ourselves. Carthage was far from invincible. Their naval strategies, while innovative, were not infallible. The Romans learned, adapted, and eventually outmaneuvered Carthage on both land and sea. It's a classic case of the student surpassing the master, proving that no empire is too mighty to fall. So, what lessons can we extract from Carthage's watery saga? For one, the importance of adaptation. Rome's willingness to innovate and embrace new tactics was a critical factor in its rise. In contrast, Carthage's failure to evolve quickly enough left it vulnerable. It's a timeless lesson that resonates beyond the ancient world. In any arena, whether it's business, technology, or warfare, adaptability is key to survival. Moreover, Carthage's story underscores the fragile nature of power. The empire's reliance on maritime strength was both its greatest asset and its most glaring weakness. In a world where alliances shifted as quickly as the tides, Carthage's dominance was precarious, dependent on the continued success of its navy and the stability of its trade networks. One blockade, one storm, one Roman innovation, and the balance could shift dramatically. Let's not forget the personal stories wrapped up in this grand narrative. Figures like Hamilcar Barca and his son Hannibal became legends, not just for their military exploits, but for their indomitable spirit. These were leaders who understood that power was as much about perception as it was about reality. They were the faces of Carthaginian resilience, a testament to the empire's ability to endure, even in the face of overwhelming odds. But as much as we admire the Barcas and their ilk, it's crucial to remember that history is written by the victors. Rome's eventual triumph over Carthage meant that the narrative was often skewed in favor of the Romans. The tale of Carthage became a story of hubris and downfall, with the Romans casting themselves as the rightful heirs to Mediterranean supremacy. Yet, the reality was more nuanced. Carthage was a victim of its own success, a powerhouse that was pulled down by the gravitational force of its own ambitions. In the end, the legacy of Carthaginian naval power is a complex tapestry of triumph and tragedy, innovation and oversight. It's a story that reminds us of the impermanence of power and the relentless march of history. Carthage may have fallen, but its influence echoes through time, a maritime giant whose lessons are as relevant today as they were millennia ago. As we wrap up this tale of waves and warfare, let's pose a few questions to ponder as you drift off to sleep. What does it truly mean to be a maritime power? Is it about the size of your fleet, the reach of your trade routes, or the strength of your alliances? Or is it about something deeper, an understanding of the sea's fickle nature and the ability to navigate its ever-changing currents? In the end, perhaps the true measure of maritime power lies not in the ships you build, but in the resilience you cultivate, the adaptability you embrace, and the legacy you leave behind. Carthage may be long gone, but its spirit sails on, a ghost ship on the Mediterranean, reminding us that in the vast ocean of history, even the greatest empires are but ships passing in the night. So, as you close your eyes, let the waves of Carthaginian history lull you into a deep, contemplative sleep, filled with dreams of ancient harbours, daring admirals, and the eternal dance of empires on the high seas. In the bustling streets of 19th-century Thessaloniki, a young Mustafa Kemal was already making waves, even if they were more like ripples at the time. Born in 1881, when the Ottoman Empire was starting to get a little long in the tooth, he was the kind of kid who would have been the teacher's favourite nightmare. You see, young Mustafa had a knack for questioning everything, from the practicality of wearing a fez to why his teachers couldn't just get to the point. Rebellion was in his DNA, and it was as if he had a little sign above his head that read, "Future Reformer, handle with care." Fast forward to his teenage years, and we've got young Mustafa enrolling in the Monastir Military High School. Now, if you think military school is all about discipline and marching in sync, you haven't met our guy. Mustafa Kemal was the sort of cadet who'd rather debate philosophy than polish his boots. It's said that he earned the nickname Kemal, meaning perfection, from one of his teachers, probably with a hefty dose of sarcasm. But it stuck, and Mustafa Kemal he became, a name that would soon echo through the annals of history with a resounding boom. By the time he was done with school, Mustafa Kemal was ready to shake things up, Ottoman style. His journey through the Ottoman army was less about marching orders and more about questioning them. He had a keen eye for strategy and a sharper tongue for calling out inefficiency. While his peers were content with a game of cards, Mustafa was the one sketching battle plans and reimagining the military brass's outdated tactics. It's no wonder that when he graduated in 1905, he was immediately sent to Damascus, a place known more for its historical ruins than career advancement opportunities. But for Mustafa, it was less about location and more about launching his revolutionary ideas. Enter the Young Turks movement, a political reform movement that was as exciting as it was dangerous. Picture a bunch of intellectuals who were done with the empire's old-school ways and wanted to bring in some fresh, Western-style thinking. Mustafa Kemal, with his sharp military wit and rebellious spirit, fit right in. These young Turks weren't just dreamers. They were doers, plotting reforms that would eventually lead to the 1908 revolution. But let's not get ahead of ourselves because, at this point, Mustafa's role was more about perfecting his poker face while planning the overthrow of a centuries-old empire. Now, Mustafa's time as a young officer wasn't all serious business. There are stories, likely exaggerated, but who doesn't love a good tale, of him participating in raucous debates and perhaps a bit too much raki, the infamous Turkish spirit. He had a certain charisma, an undeniable presence that could turn a room of skeptics into believers. It's said he once bet a friend that he could convince a group of officers to abandon their outdated tactics simply by arguing his point over dinner. And while the details are lost to the haze of history, let's just say Mustafa Kemal rarely lost a bet. In these years, he honed skills that would later define his leadership, an uncanny ability to read people, a strategic mind that could anticipate moves like a chess master, and a relentless drive to push for change, even when change was the least popular item on the menu. He was also developing his vision for a modern nation, one that didn't just mirror Western ideas, but adapted them to the unique tapestry of Turkish culture. Let's not forget the humour, though. Imagine Mustafa Kemal, in a room full of stuffy generals, cracking a joke about the empire's outdated fashion sense, or the bureaucracy that moved at the speed of a snail on vacation. His wit was his weapon, and he wielded it with the precision of a general and the charm of a rogue. These were the early days of a man who would eventually reshape a nation, but even then his penchant for the unconventional was crystal clear. Mustafa Kemal's early military career wasn't just a series of promotions, it was a proving ground for his ideas and ambitions. He wasn't just content to rise through the ranks, he sought to change the very nature of the ranks themselves. His time in the Ottoman army taught him the value of discipline, but also the necessity of questioning authority, a lesson he would carry throughout his life. As we wrap up this leg of Mustafa Kemal's journey, let's pause to appreciate the irony. Here was a man born into an empire on the brink of collapse, attending a military school in a city that was a melting pot of cultures and ideas. Yet, from these humble, chaotic beginnings, he would emerge as a leader who would not only embrace reform, but demand it. His early life was a tapestry of contradictions, rebellions, and, yes, a fair share of laughs. But in the end, it was these very elements that set the stage for the remarkable transformation he would lead. And that, my friends, is where the real story begins. So, as the curtain rises on the next act of Mustafa Kemal's saga, we're not in some quaint Ottoman hamlet with tea and baklava. We're in the thick of World War I, where the Ottoman Empire finds itself in the trenches, both literally and metaphorically. The year is 1915, and the Allies have this grand idea. Let's knock the Ottomans out of the war by taking the Gallipoli Peninsula. Easy peasy, right? Well, not when you've got Mustafa Kemal on the other side. Gallipoli was supposed to be a quick victory for the Allies. They envisioned a swift naval strike, followed by a leisurely land stroll to Istanbul. But as anyone familiar with underestimating their opponents will tell you, it's all fun and games until someone like Mustafa Kemal shows up. A young colonel at the time, Kemal wasn't just about wearing crisp uniforms and barking orders. He was a master strategist with a flair for the dramatic. The kind of guy who would turn up at a fancy dinner party and leave with everyone's attention and their troops' morale. Let's set the scene. The Gallipoli campaign was a chaotic mess, a bit like a poorly organized concert where no one knows where to stand or what to play. But Kemal had his act together. He was stationed at the Anafata Ridge, and when the Allied forces launched their assault, Kemal decided to take matters into his own hands. He famously ordered his men to lie down and take cover until the enemy was just a stone's throw away, a move that was both audacious and a little bit insane, but hey, it worked. His troops were able to repel the attack, and Kemal's reputation as a military genius was sealed. The Gallipoli campaign became a drawn-out affair stretching from April 1915 to January 1916. The Allies suffered around 250,000 casualties, a staggering number by any count. In contrast, the Ottomans, under Kemal's leadership, also took a beating but held strong with a similar number of casualties. But here's the kicker. The Ottomans were fighting on their home turf with far fewer resources. Imagine trying to win a chess game where your opponent starts with half the pieces. You get the idea. Gallipoli wasn't just about military tactics, it was a testament to the power of leadership under duress. Kemal was the kind of leader who could inspire with a speech or a steely glare, depending on the mood. He once told his men, "I am not ordering you to attack, I am ordering you to die." Now, that's not exactly something you'd find on an inspirational poster, but it sure rallied the troops. His ability to motivate soldiers under impossible circumstances was legendary, and it was during this campaign that he truly began to emerge as a national hero. Of course, the Gallipoli campaign wasn't a solo act. It was a chaotic symphony involving many players, from British and Anzac forces to French and Ottoman soldiers. But Kemal's role was pivotal, like that lead guitarist who turns a decent band into an unforgettable performance. The defeat at Gallipoli was a bitter pill for the Allies, but for Kemal it was a stepping stone, a chance to prove his mettle and pave the way for his future leadership. Now, let's fast forward to the aftermath of World War I, where the victorious Allies decided to carve up the Ottoman Empire like a Thanksgiving turkey. The Treaty of Sèvres, signed in 1920, was a textbook example of how not to set post-war conditions. Picture a treaty so lopsided it felt like a bad joke with no punchline. It stripped the Ottoman Empire of vast territories and imposed harsh economic controls, essentially reducing it to a puppet state. The treaty also proposed the creation of new nations, like Armenia and Kurdistan, while giving Greece control over parts of Anatolia. If the Allies were trying to antagonize every possible faction in the region, they were doing a fine job. For Mustafa Kemal, the Treaty of Sèvres was a non-starter, a slap in the face delivered with a bureaucratic flourish. While the Ottoman government in Constantinople was ready to capitulate, Kemal saw the treaty as an existential threat to Turkish sovereignty. And so began the Turkish War of Independence, a conflict that would see Kemal rise from a respected military leader to the founding father of modern Turkey. This was a time of high stakes and high attention, as Kemal rallied the Turkish national movement against both the occupying Allied forces and the Sultan's own government. It's like leading a double rebellion, with a side of geopolitical chaos. The odds were against him, but Kemal had a knack for turning the improbable into the inevitable. He convened the Erzurum and Sivas Congresses in 1919, events that were less about polite discourse and more about setting the stage for a full-blown national uprising. Kemal's vision was clear, a modern, secular and independent Turkey. But achieving it required not just military prowess, but political savvy. He knew how to play the long game, uniting disparate factions and rallying support from the general populace. His leadership style was a blend of charisma and ruthlessness, the kind that could inspire loyalty and fear in equal measure. It wasn't just about fighting battles, it was about winning hearts and minds. And so, as the curtain falls on this chapter of Mustafa Kemal's story, we find ourselves on the brink of a new era. The Turkish War of Independence was more than a military conflict. It was a turning point in history, a moment when a nation refused to be written out of the script. Kemal's journey from Gallipoli to the founding of the Republic of Turkey was a testament to the power of vision and the tenacity to see it through. But as we know, history is a relentless march forward, and Mustafa Kemal's story is far from over. So stay tuned, because the best is yet to come. With the proclamation of the Republic of Turkey in 1923, Mustafa Kemal Atatürk found himself in the driver's seat of a brand new nation, ready to take it for a spin down the road of modernization. But this wasn't just a leisurely Sunday drive. Oh no, Atatürk had his foot firmly on the gas pedal, aiming to transform Turkey from a relic of the Ottoman past into a sleek, modern state. And like any good road trip, it came with its fair share of detours and pit stops. Buckle up, folks, because this ride's about to get interesting. First up on Atatürk's grand tour of reforms was the alphabet switcheroo. Now, before you roll your eyes at the thought of an alphabet being a big deal, let's dig a little deeper. The Ottoman Empire's official script was Arabic, a beautifully intricate script, but one that didn't exactly align with the sounds of the Turkish language. It was like trying to play Beethoven on a kazoo, possible, but not ideal. Atatürk saw the Latin alphabet as the turbo engine Turkey needed to boost literacy rates and drive the nation into the modern world. Enter the language revolution of 1928, a move that was less about dotting I's and crossing T's and more about overhauling an entire educational system. Atatürk wasn't just changing letters, he was changing the way people thought, communicated, and connected with the world. The new alphabet was officially adopted on November 1, 1928, but the groundwork had started earlier. Atatürk himself famously went on a nationwide tour, blackboard in two, teaching the new letters to everyone from schoolchildren to farmers. Picture a rock star with chalk instead of a guitar, and you're halfway there. But here's where the rubber really meets the road. There was no gradual rollout. Atatürk wasn't the kind of leader who believed in soft launches. The new alphabet was introduced with the kind of immediacy that makes you wonder if he was secretly a fan of cliffhangers. Newspapers, government documents, street signs, everything needed to be Latinized and fast. The task was monumental. Imagine trying to convince a whole country to start texting with a brand new set of emojis overnight. It was ambitious, audacious, and, for many, downright bewildering. The results were mixed, as you'd expect. Older generations, who had spent their lives reading and writing in Arabic script, felt like they'd been handed a ticket to a foreign land with no translator in sight. Meanwhile, younger Turks embraced the change with the enthusiasm of folks who had never been burdened by tradition. Literacy rates soared, from a paltry 10% in the 1920s to over 70% by the 1960s. It was a cultural shift of seismic proportions, but Atatürk was never one to shy away from a bit of cultural tectonics. Next on Atatürk's list was the legal system, which was about as modern as a horse-drawn carriage in a Ferrari showroom. The Ottoman legal codes were a patchwork quilt of Sharia law, customary practices, and imperial decrees. Atatürk's vision for Turkey was a secular state with a legal backbone that mirrored the best of Western systems. So, in 1926, Turkey adopted a new civil code based on the Swiss model, which was like swapping out an old typewriter for the latest high-speed computer. This code change wasn't just about laws, it was about redefining social norms. Women gained the right to inherit and own property, a radical departure from previous norms. The equalization of the sexes under the law was a bold step forward, even if it did leave some traditionalists clutching their pearls. In fact, Atatürk's reforms granted women the right to vote and run for office by 1934, a move that many European countries wouldn't match until years later. But let's be honest, not everyone was thrilled about these changes. For some, it felt like the cultural equivalent of waking up to find your entire wardrobe replaced with the latest Parisian fashion. Exciting for some, but downright uncomfortable for others. The cultural shock was real, and Atatürk's push towards secularism was met with resistance from those who saw Islam as an inseparable part of Turkish identity. Atatürk's secular drive wasn't about erasing religion, it was about ensuring that religion and state affairs travelled in separate lanes. The abolition of the Sultanate in 1922 and the Caliphate in 1924 were part of this grand vision. He wanted a state where the call to prayer didn't dictate the daily grind of politics, and where the government didn't play favourites with the faithful. It was a delicate balancing act, like juggling while riding a unicycle, but Atatürk was determined to make it work. Now, as with any great transformation, there were bumps along the way. The hat law of 1925, which mandated European-style hats instead of the traditional fez, might sound trivial, but it was a cultural bombshell. The fez, with its Ottoman connotations, was seen as an anchor holding Turkey back. However, changing hats proved easier than changing hearts, and many Turks found themselves in a sartorial conundrum caught between tradition and modernity. Atatürk's reforms were a whirlwind of change, a cultural revolution with the force of a monsoon. He was a man on a mission, with a vision of Turkey as a modern, secular and progressive nation. But let's not sugarcoat it. These reforms were as controversial as they were transformative. Atatürk wasn't just reshaping a nation, he was reshaping identities, challenging deeply held beliefs, and asking a society to evolve at breakneck speed. As we rev up for the next leg of Atatürk's journey, it's clear that the road to modernization was neither smooth nor straightforward. It was a path paved with bold ideas, ambitious reforms, and more than a few raised eyebrows. But Atatürk's legacy is a testament to the power of vision and the courage to see it through, even when the destination is far from certain. So stay tuned, because the story of Turkey's transformation is far from over, and the best, or perhaps the most challenging, is yet to come. And as Atatürk barreled down the road of modernization, with reforms flying out the window like confetti, he realized something crucial. A nation doesn't just run on ideals and alphabet swaps, it needs a robust engine under the hood. Enter Atatürk's economic policies, where he attempted to turbocharge Turkey's economy with a mix of ambition, nationalism, and maybe just a dash of wishful thinking. Let's start with the 5-year industrial plan, launched in 1934, which was less of a gentle nudge and more of a caffeinated jump-start for Turkey's economy. Picture this. Atatürk, looking for inspiration, took a page out of the Soviet playbook. Now, before you imagine him donning a furry hat and practicing his Russian, remember that Atatürk was all about pragmatism, not ideology. He saw the Soviet Union's rapid industrialization and thought, why not us? Of course, Turkey wasn't exactly awash in resources or capital, so the plan was ambitious to say the least. The goal was simple, shift Turkey from an agrarian economy to an industrial powerhouse. The punchline? They had to do it on a shoestring budget. The state took the lead, pouring money into textiles, iron and steel, and mining industries. The results were mixed. Some factories sprang up like mushrooms after a rainstorm, while others resembled those sad plants you forget to water. And yet, despite the bumps, by 1939, industrial production had increased by about 96%, which isn't too shabby for a country still finding its economic feet. Now, let's talk about nationalization, Atatürk's not-so-secret weapon for economic independence. If Turkey were a band, Atatürk was determined to make sure they owned the rights to their music. He believed that nationalizing key industries would free Turkey from foreign influence. Railways, tobacco and mining sectors were nationalized faster than you could say economic sovereignty. But here's the kicker. By kicking out foreign management, Turkey also lost out on expertise and investment, which made the transition about as smooth as a gravel road. But Atatürk wasn't just about factories and railroads, he had a soft spot for the countryside too. Modernizing agriculture was another pillar of his economic vision. The irony? His attempts to modernize farming often collided with the very traditions he was trying to overhaul. He introduced model farms to showcase modern techniques, but convincing farmers to trade their trusty oxen for tractors was like asking a cat to fetch, technically possible, but not without a few scratches. The state also pushed for land reform, aiming to break up large estates and distribute land more equitably. But landowners weren't exactly thrilled to give up their real estate empires, and resistance was stiff. It's a tale as old as time. Those with power and land aren't keen on sharing, and the bureaucratic red tape made progress slower than a snail on a treadmill. But what about the unintended consequences? Atatürk's focus on industry and state control had its downsides. The private sector often felt left out, like a kid not picked for the soccer team. Small businesses struggled to compete with state-run enterprises, and innovation sometimes took a back seat to government directives. In the quest for economic autonomy, efficiency was sometimes sacrificed at the altar of nationalism. Yet, it's hard to argue with some of the results. By the late 1930s, Turkey had a more diversified economy, and the foundation was laid for future development. But let's not romanticize it too much. These economic policies were as much about survival as they were about progress. Atatürk was playing a high-stakes game of chess with limited pieces, and while he made some brilliant moves, not every gambit paid off. As we peer into the economic laboratory that was Atatürk's Turkey, it's clear that these policies were a mix of genius, necessity, and a fair share of trial and error. The 5-year plan and nationalization efforts were bold, but they were also an experiment, one with results that were as unpredictable as they were transformative. And so, as we leave this chapter in Atatürk's saga, we find a nation grappling with the growing pains of modernization. The road ahead was still rocky, but Atatürk's vision had set Turkey on a course it couldn't veer from easily. In a world where the past often clings like a stubborn shadow, Atatürk was determined to forge a future where Turkey could stand tall on its own 2 feet, albeit with a few stumbles along the way. Stay tuned, because the story of Turkey's transformation is far from finished, and the next leg of this journey promises more twists, turns, and the occasional traffic jam. As Turkey navigated the rocky road of modernization, it became increasingly clear that Atatürk was not just a statesman, but a symbol, a larger-than-life figure whose image would cast a long shadow over the nation he helped forge. In the whirlwind of reforms and economic gambits, a cult of personality began to take root, with Mustafa Kemal Atatürk at its center, both revered and mythologized in ways that seemed to defy the very rationalism he championed. In his final years, Atatürk's health declined, a stark contrast to the vigorous, always-on-the-move leader the public had come to know. Cirrhosis of the liver, a consequence of his well-documented fondness for raka, began to take its toll. Despite the illness, he remained active, determined to push Turkey further along the path of progress. The year was 1938, and even as his physical condition worsened, Atatürk was still the driving force behind the Republic's forward march. His death on November 10 of that year was a seismic event, leaving a nation to grapple with the loss of the man who had been its compass. Atatürk's passing marked the beginning of his transformation into a national icon, a process that was as inevitable as it was ironic. The same leader who had dismantled the Ottoman Sultanate and Caliphate to build a secular state was now being enshrined in a quasi-religious aura. His mausoleum, An-Nich Kabir, stands as a testament to his enduring influence, attracting millions of visitors each year who come to pay their respects, as if on a pilgrimage. But let's put on our myth-busting hats for a moment. The cult of Atatürk, like any good legend, is a mix of fact and fiction, heroism and hyperbole. For starters, the image of Atatürk as a flawless visionary overlooks the many complexities and contradictions of his leadership. Yes, he was a reformer, but his methods were often authoritarian, a contradiction that still stirs debate today. His single-party rule and suppression of opposition painted a picture of a leader who, despite advocating for democracy, often sidelined it in practice. Despite the ironies, Atatürk's legacy remains a cornerstone of Turkish identity. His vision of a secular, modern nation-state continues to influence Turkey's political landscape, even as the country grapples with balancing tradition and modernity. The principles of Kemalism, republicanism, nationalism, populism, statism, secularism, and reformism are embedded in the nation's DNA, shaping its policies and societal norms. They serve as both a guiding framework and a point of contention in Turkey's ongoing evolution. Take secularism, for example. Atatürk's strict separation of religion and state was groundbreaking, but it also sparked an enduring debate about Turkish identity. In a nation where Islam is deeply woven into the cultural fabric, secularism remains both a pillar of national policy and a flashpoint for political tension. The tug-of-war between secularists and Islamists has been a defining feature of Turkish politics, testing the resilience of Atatürk's vision in the face of changing social dynamics. Economically, Atatürk's push for industrialization and nationalization laid the groundwork for Turkey's future growth, even if the path was far from smooth. His 5-year plans and state-driven economic model were stepping stones, but they were also stepping stones with some pretty jagged edges. Today, Turkey stands as a testament to the mixed results of these policies, boasting a diversified economy that's still wrestling with the age-old challenges of balancing state control and market freedom. Politically, the single-party era of Atatürk's rule set the stage for Turkey's transition to a multi-party democracy, albeit a rocky one. The Republic faced numerous military coups throughout the 20th century, each a stark reminder of the delicate balance between civilian rule and military influence. Even now, the spectre of military intervention looms large, a legacy of the Republic's early years under Atatürk's centralized power. Yet, for all the myth-making and reality-checking, Atatürk's impact on Turkey is undeniable. He was a man of his time, a leader who embraced the future with a boldness that was both visionary and, at times, ruthless. His reforms challenged the very essence of Turkish society, pushing it towards a modern identity that could stand shoulder to shoulder with the West while remaining uniquely its own. As Turkey continues to forge its path in the 21st century, the legacy of Mustafa Kemal Atatürk remains a guiding light and sometimes a contentious point. His story is a reminder of the power of leadership to shape history, but also of the complexities and contradictions that come with wielding such power. Atatürk may have set Turkey on its course, but the journey is far from over. The nation he helped build continues to evolve, navigating the intricate dance between past and present, tradition and innovation. So, as we close the book on this chapter of history, it's worth contemplating the dual nature of Atatürk's legacy. He was a man who dreamed big and delivered bigger, a leader whose impact is felt in every corner of Turkey's modern landscape. Yet, he was also a man of contradictions whose vision was both a source of inspiration and debate. In the end, Atatürk's story is not just about one man's remarkable journey, but about a nation's ongoing quest to define itself in a world that is ever-changing. And that, dear friends, is a story that continues to unfold, as vibrant and challenging as the man who set it in motion.